Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight we'll drift into a question that has lingered at the edges of history, myth, and memory. If you close your eyes for a moment, picture the pyramids of Giza. Rising out of the desert, their lines so precise that even after thousands of years, they seem almost eternal. These are humanity's most enduring monuments, silent, immovable, and endlessly mysterious. According to mainstream history, they were built about 4,500 years ago, during Egypt's Old Kingdom, under the rule of pharaohs whose names still echo in stone. But what if that story is not the whole story? What if these vast pyramids are not merely 4,500 years old, but far older? What if they are survivors from a forgotten world? Monuments that stood before the last ice age, carrying secrets across the rise and fall of civilizations. Tonight, we're not here to argue or to prove. We're here to imagine, to let the boundaries of accepted history blur into possibility, to consider the pyramids not just as tombs or triumphs of dynastic Egypt, but as messages carved in stone by hands reaching back far deeper into time than we've been taught to believe. So settle in, let the desert night stretch out in your mind, and feel the weight of those ancient stones pressing against the silence of the ages. The pyramids endure, but the question that follows us tonight is this: endure from when? To begin, let us step carefully into what we know, or at least, what most scholars agree upon. The pyramids of Giza, along with the Great Sphinx and the sprawling necropolis that surrounds them, are conventionally dated to Egypt's Old Kingdom during the time of the 4th dynasty, nearly 600 years before the Common Era. In this widely accepted account, the Great Pyramid was commissioned under Pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, and completed within his reign. Towering beside it, the Pyramid of Khafre, slightly smaller but crowned with its own grandeur, and further south, the Pyramid of Menkaure, more modest in scale but no less ambitious, complete the triad that has dominated the desert horizon for more than 4 millennia. The evidence for this timeline is well rehearsed. Hieroglyphic inscriptions carved into temple walls name these pharaohs with reverence, embedding their deeds within the eternal stone. King lists, carefully etched in sacred places like the temples of Abydos and Saqqara, trace the succession of rulers in a line of divine authority, situating Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure securely within the Old Kingdom's golden age. Within hidden chambers of the Great Pyramid itself, the discovery of quarry marks graffiti scrawled in ochre by workmen names the crews as the Friends of Khufu, the White Crown of Khufu, and other titles that explicitly tie the monument to its royal patron. For archaeologists, these inscriptions are as close to a builder's signature as we are likely to find. Surrounding the pyramids, the funerary complexes add further weight to the orthodox dating. Temples linked by causeways to the pyramid entrances, mastabas for nobles and officials, and cemeteries for workers radiate outward in deliberate design. Taken together, these features form a cultural tapestry that seems firmly rooted in the 26th century BCE. They are not isolated marvels but parts of a broader architectural tradition. And indeed, when we trace Egypt's earlier monuments, we see an evolutionary path that appears to lead directly toward Giza's wonders. Consider the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built nearly a century before Khufu. It began as a simple rectangular mastaba, a flat-roofed tomb of mud brick and stone, before architects stacked new layers upon it, creating the world's first pyramid. From there, experimental designs emerged. Bent pyramids, collapsed pyramids, smooth-sided attempts that reveal trial and error as ancient builders honed their craft. In this light, the Great Pyramid is not a sudden anomaly, but the triumphant culmination of generations of architectural ambition, a crown jewel resting securely atop the known pyramid tradition. This mainstream narrative carries with it a deep sense of continuity and human achievement. It allows us to see the pyramids as products of organization, wealth, and devotion. With the Nile's fertile abundance sustaining agriculture, the state had the means to feed and house vast numbers of laborers. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of workers' villages near Giza, suggesting a rotating labor force of thousands, not slaves toiling endlessly, but citizens fulfilling a kind of national duty, rewarded with food, shelter, and honor. In this account, ramps of mud brick and limestone chippings, combined with ingenious sledges dragged over lubricated tracks, enabled the seemingly impossible task of hauling multi-ton blocks from quarries to their places in the desert. For many historians, this explanation is satisfying. It grounds the pyramids in tangible history, demystifying them without diminishing their grandeur. They become not alien artifacts or remnants of forgotten worlds, but monuments to human persistence, the apex of Egypt's old kingdom and a testament to the vision of its rulers. And yet, when you stand before the Great Pyramid, the mystery refuses to vanish. The sheer scale overwhelms rational explanation. Nearly 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 70 tons, arranged with such accuracy that the four sides of the base deviate from a perfect square by less than 20 centimeters. The structure rises to its apex with an alignment so precise that its sides point almost exactly to the cardinal directions, deviating by only fractions of a degree. The difference between theory and execution is so small that even modern engineers, armed with laser levels and GPS, pause in astonishment. How did a society of the Bronze Age, equipped with tools of copper and wood, marshal such precision? How did they survey vast distances with such accuracy, long before the invention of the magnetic compass? How did they raise blocks of stone taller than a house and place them with joints so tight that even today you cannot slide a sheet of paper between them? The conventional answers, of course, are there, with careful sighting instruments, with ropes stretched taut beneath the sun, with relentless organization and mathematical insight. The Egyptians could have achieved such feats. Archaeologists point to the gradual evolution of pyramid design as evidence of learning through practice. They argue that the brilliance lies not in lost technologies but in ingenuity, coordination, and the will of a people to create something that would last forever. And yet, even as we accept these answers, the pyramids themselves seem to whisper of something more. Perhaps it is their sheer durability. While mud brick homes and temples have crumbled, while papyrus records have turned to dust, these monuments endure. They rise above the desert, not just as tombs for kings, but as eternal presences, structures that defy time itself. Their silence is not empty but resonant, inviting speculation, reflection, and awe. Because when we look at them closely, the questions begin to multiply. Why are their proportions so elegant, their geometry so precise? Why do their dimensions appear to encode mathematical constants, pi, the golden ratio, and relationships tied to Earth itself, such as the approximate length of a solar year or the curvature of the planet? Are these coincidences, products of practical necessity, or hints of a deeper knowledge carried within their stones? Mainstream historians caution us not to overread the data, warning that patterns can emerge by chance when numbers are many. But others see in these proportions the fingerprints of something more, an ancient wisdom, a message, or perhaps even a legacy preserved within limestone and granite. And here, the pyramids step beyond archaeology into philosophy. They remind us of the limits of certainty, of how even the most studied of monuments can hold mysteries beyond our grasp. Were they simply tombs, born of dynastic ambition? Or do they also preserve fragments of knowledge older than we remember, carried forward into history as echoes of a forgotten world? In their silence, the pyramids allow for both truths at once. They are undeniably the crowning achievements of Old Kingdom Egypt, grounded in the names of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. And yet, they are also timeless enigmas, drawing us into speculation, reminding us that even within history's certainties, wonder persists. When you stand beneath their towering sides, looking up at blocks weathered but still unmoved by time, you feel both anchored and unmoored. Anchored in the knowledge that humans built them, unmoored by the possibility that what they built may carry meanings and memories deeper than history records. And perhaps that is the true mystery of the pyramids, not that we cannot explain them, but that even when we can, they continue to feel as though they belong to something greater, something older, something enduring. Their organization, mathematics, determination. But still, the pyramids seem to whisper of something deeper, something more enduring. For some, the conventional story of the pyramids, brilliant though it is, still feels incomplete. It explains much, yet leaves behind an aftertaste of enigma, a sense that these monuments might not only be the apex of Old Kingdom ambition, but survivors of something older. And it is here, standing on the threshold of archaeology and myth, that an alternative timeline begins to whisper. This hypothesis suggests that the pyramids are not merely 400–500 years old, but could be far older, built not in the age of Khufu, but perhaps in an epoch stretching back 10,000, even 20,000 years. Such a claim rewrites not just Egyptian history but human history itself. It places the pyramids deep within the shadows of the last ice age, long before the rise of dynastic kings, before the Nile was the heart of a unified kingdom, even before agriculture took root in the Fertile Crescent. Why would anyone suggest such a radical revision? Part of the reason lies in the myths, the stories carried down through the ages, etched not on stone but in memory. Flood myths echo across cultures, tales of worlds swallowed by rising seas, of golden ages that ended in cataclysm. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a deluge. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah rides the waters. In Hindu tradition, Manu is warned by a fish to build a boat before the flood. Even in the Americas and Oceania, stories of great inundations persist. Could these be cultural fossils, collective memories of the Ice Age's violent end, when glaciers melted and seas surged, drowning coastlines where early civilizations might once have stood? To the advocates of the alternative timeline, the pyramids are not anomalies of the Bronze Age, but remnants of such a lost world. If a culture had flourished before the floods, its coastlines now drowned, its records erased, its people scattered, then perhaps only its greatest monuments, vast, immovable, built to endure, could have survived into our age. In this view, dynastic Egypt did not invent the pyramids, it inherited them, perhaps even adopted them into its own cultural story, reinterpreting their meaning while adding inscriptions and temples around them. Supporters point to anomalies in the construction that seem, at least to them, out of place for the Old Kingdom. The sheer precision of the Great Pyramid's base, aligned to true north with uncanny accuracy, seems less like a first attempt at perfection and more like the mature expression of an already ancient tradition. The internal architecture, the grand gallery with its corbelled walls, the descending and ascending passages, the hidden chambers feels deliberate in ways that go beyond funerary function, almost as if they encode knowledge not fully understood by those who inherited them. And then there is the alignment with the stars. The three pyramids of Giza appear to mirror the belt stars of Orion, a pattern some researchers argue would have matched most closely not in 2500 BCE, but around 10,500 BCE, when the constellations' tilt aligned more neatly with the pyramid's positions. The Sphinx, too, gazes directly east toward the rising sun on the spring equinox. Some believe that in 10,500 BCE, it would have looked toward the constellation of Leo, echoing its leonine form. marking a cosmic age now long past. If these alignments were intentional, they would suggest builders who thought not in centuries but in millennia, crafting monuments as timekeepers of the sky. Of course, mainstream Egyptology resists these claims, and for good reason. To accept them would mean discarding much of what is considered established chronology. It would mean positing an advanced culture existing at a time when humans were believed to be hunter-gatherers, without writing, without metal tools, without states or cities. It would mean rewriting the very definition of civilization itself. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, hard proof remains elusive. Yet the appeal of the alternative timeline endures, because it speaks to a deep human intuition that history may not be linear, that greatness may have risen and fallen before, that our story might be one of cycles rather than a straight climb upward. If the pyramids are older than we believe, they are not only the crown of dynastic Egypt but messages from an Ice Age world. They become survivors of flood and fire, relics of a civilization erased by the shifting climate and the weight of time, yet determined to leave behind something that could endure. And perhaps that is why the theory resonates. Because when we look at the pyramids, we do not just see tombs, we see eternity. We see the impossible made manifest in stone. And in that impossibility lies the suggestion, faint but persistent, that these monuments may have roots deeper than the Nile, older than dynasties, stretching back to a world we have forgotten. To follow the thread of this idea, we must leave behind the golden sands of dynastic Egypt and journey far deeper into time, back to a world utterly transformed, a world cloaked in ice. Imagine the Earth as it was around 20,000 years ago, at the height of the last ice age. The continents had the same outlines, but their faces were different, their climates unfamiliar. If you were alive then, you would not have recognized the world you know today. Across the northern hemisphere, colossal sheets of ice sprawled outward from the poles, in some places more than 2 kilometers thick. Much of North America lay buried beneath the Laurentide ice sheet, while Scandinavia and northern Europe groaned under their own frozen mantle. These glaciers were not gentle blankets of snow, but walls of ice grinding across the land, sculpting valleys, flattening mountains, and dragging boulders the size of houses across their frozen highways. Because so much of the planet's water was locked into ice, sea levels were far lower than they are now, over 100 meters lower. Entire landscapes that are now hidden beneath the oceans lay exposed. The shallow seabeds of the North Sea stretched into a broad plain, later named Doggerland, a fertile territory where rivers braided across grassy valleys. The Mediterranean was narrower, its coasts extended. Even the coastlines of India, Southeast Asia, and the Americas reached far beyond their modern boundaries. Perhaps most significantly, bridges of land connected what are now isolated worlds. In the far north, the Bering Land Bridge stretched across what is now the Bering Strait, linking Asia to North America. Wide, windswept tundra connected the continents, allowing animals and the people who followed them to cross between worlds. Elsewhere, chains of land tied islands together, making journeys easier and opening paths long since drowned. If civilizations had existed along these ancient coastlines, most of their cities would now rest beneath the sea, invisible to our eyes, buried in sediment and salt. But what was this Ice Age world like to live in? Imagine the air colder, sharper, and drier than today. Forests retreated in many regions, giving way to steppes and tundra where herds of great beasts roamed. In Europe and Asia, woolly mammoths grazed alongside shaggy rhinoceroses. Lions larger than any alive today stalked the plains, while cave bears lumbered through forests and valleys. In the Americas, saber-toothed cats and giant ground sloths ruled ecosystems now long vanished. It was a world both alien and familiar, where humanity lived not as rulers, but as participants in a broader, harsher struggle for survival. Yet humanity was there. Our ancestors were already scattered across continents, living in caves, valleys, and along riverbanks. They hunted with stone-tipped spears, carved ornaments from bone and ivory, and painted images of animals by flickering firelight on cave walls. The caves of Lascaux and Chauvet in France, Altamira in Spain, and countless others hold vivid reminders of their presence: bison, horses, mammoths, and abstract signs that may have carried meanings we no longer understand. These works of art, tens of thousands of years old, speak not only of survival, but of imagination, of culture, of a mind capable of abstraction and wonder. And that is where the question begins to stir. If humans in this Ice Age world could paint, carve, and dream, what else might they have achieved? Could an advanced culture, or even the beginnings of one, have emerged in some corner of this world? Mainstream archaeology tells us no. According to the conventional view, Ice Age humans lived in small bands, numbering in the dozens, scattered thinly across vast regions. They were hunter-gatherers, mobile and adaptive, but without agriculture, metallurgy, or written language. The great flowering of civilization, it is said, had to wait until after the Ice Age ended, when farming allowed large populations to settle, build cities, and eventually construct monuments like the pyramids. But absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Much of the land where Ice Age peoples would have thrived, the fertile coastal plains, was swallowed by the seas when the glaciers melted and waters rose. Entire landscapes disappeared, taking with them any traces of settlements, temples, or monuments. What might have been lost beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific? How many stories now lie hidden under silt and coral reefs, erased not by time alone, but by the sudden floods of a warming planet? Consider this. Within the last few decades, archaeologists discovered Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site of massive stone circles carved and raised over 11,000 years ago. Its existence shocked the scholarly world, because it predates agriculture as we understand it, suggesting that hunter-gatherers were capable of organizing, planning, and constructing monumental architecture long before the conventional timeline allowed. If Göbekli Tepe survived, half buried on a hillside, how many other sites of equal or greater significance may still lie hidden, perhaps drowned, perhaps eroded, perhaps erased entirely? It is within this uncertainty that the alternative pyramid timeline finds its footing. If an advanced culture did rise during the Ice Age, it would not need to have been global, nor to match our modern definition of civilization. It could have been regional, thriving along a fertile plain now submerged, drawing upon knowledge and techniques we have forgotten. When the Ice Age ended, when the glaciers collapsed and seas surged, such a culture could have been swept away, its people scattered, its knowledge fractured. Perhaps fragments of it endured in myths, in symbols, in oral traditions passed down across generations. And perhaps, just perhaps, the pyramids or the knowledge to build them were among the survivors. What makes this speculation so alluring is that it does not require us to invent a world of impossibilities. We know Ice Age humans were intelligent. We know they were resourceful. We know they carried in their minds the same capacity for wonder and innovation that we do. If given time, environment, and the right conditions, could they not have organized into something more complex than we imagine? Could they not have left behind a legacy, hidden not in the written word but in stone? The Ice Age world, with its harsh climates and shifting landscapes, was a crucible. Out of it emerged not only survival, but imagination, art, music, myth. And when we consider the pyramids in this context, the question becomes less about whether it was possible and more about whether we are willing to entertain the possibility that history may hold deeper layers than we have yet uncovered. If there is one place where the debate over lost civilizations finds its most visible battleground, it is not within the Great Pyramid itself, but just a short distance away, in the shadow of the Sphinx. That enigmatic guardian, half lion and half human, lies reclined against the desert floor, its eyes gazing eastward as though awaiting a dawn long past. For millennia, it has been a symbol of Egypt's majesty, but also of its mystery. And it is in the Sphinx's scars, etched into its limestone body, that some see the most provocative clues of all. Look closely at the weathering that marks its flanks. Deep fissures, vertical and rounded, carve into the body soft curves that do not seem to match the sharp angular abrasion left by desert winds. To most geologists, erosion in the arid Sahara should produce horizontal pitting and flaking, shaped by centuries of sand-laden gusts. Yet the Sphinx's body seems worn by something different, patterns more suggestive of water than of wind. Heavy, sustained rainfall, cascading for centuries, could have sculpted such marks. And therein lies the puzzle. The Giza Plateau has not known rains of that magnitude for thousands upon thousands of years. It was this observation that led Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, to propose his controversial theory in the early 1990s. Examining the erosion patterns, he concluded that the Sphinx must be far older than the conventional dating allows. If the wear is truly the result of rainfall, then the monument must have been carved not during the reign of Khafre around 2500 BCE, but at a time when the Sahara was lush with rivers and grasslands, perhaps as far back as 7000 or even 9000 BCE. That would place its origin deep in the pre-dynastic era, long before the pharaohs, long before agriculture had even taken root in Egypt. The implications are staggering. If Schoch is correct, then the Sphinx predates the very civilization we attribute it to. It would stand as a relic, not of dynastic ambition, but of a forgotten people, a culture capable of carving a monument of such scale in an age when we assume no such culture existed. If true, the Sphinx would be one of the oldest surviving monuments on Earth, its battered body a messenger across millennia from a civilization erased by time. Yet, as with all bold claims, there are counter-arguments. Many geologists remain unconvinced, pointing out that the type of erosion seen on the Sphinx could have arisen from other processes. Limestone, they note, is a soft stone, prone to weathering even in arid environments. Salt crystallization, chemical breakdown, and the expansion and contraction caused by temperature shifts can all produce rounded fissures similar to those attributed to rainfall. Wind erosion, especially when combined with occasional floods from Nile overflows or localized rains, could also explain the patterns. Archaeologists add their own objections. They argue that redating the Sphinx to 7000 or 9000 BCE leaves it standing alone, unmoored from the cultural fabric that surrounds it. The temples at its base, the causeways, the funerary complexes, these are all linked stylistically and functionally to the Fourth Dynasty. To separate the Sphinx from this network would be to imagine it as an isolated survivor, inexplicably predating the very culture that surrounds it. For mainstream scholars, such a leap is less plausible than the idea that weathering can be explained by more familiar processes. Still, the questions persist. For when you stand before the Sphinx, its face eroded almost to anonymity, its body scarred yet enduring, you cannot help but wonder if its silence conceals a deeper story. What if the weathering truly does bear witness to rains that last fell thousands of years before Egypt's dynasties arose? What if the Sphinx was already ancient when Khafre ruled, adopted into his funerary landscape, reinterpreted and claimed but not originally carved? If that were true, it would mean that the Sphinx is not simply a symbol of dynastic Egypt, but a relic of a far older world, one that has otherwise been erased. It would mean that at least some traces of Ice Age civilizations have survived, hidden in plain sight, rebranded by later cultures. The thought is unsettling because it hints at how much we may have already lost, how much of human history may lie buried, misattributed, or weathered beyond recognition. What makes this debate so compelling is not just the technical details of geology, but the way it forces us to confront the fragility of evidence. Stone, which we think of as eternal, is still vulnerable to the elements. In a few thousand years, rain, wind, and sun can alter even the most enduring monument. Over tens of thousands of years, whole landscapes are transformed beyond recognition. How then can we expect to find clear and unambiguous traces of civilizations that may have existed 12,000, 15,000, or 20,000 years ago? This is why the Sphinx matters, not simply as an icon of Egypt, but as a case study in how elusive the truth can be when deep time is involved. The scars on its body are open to interpretation, and in those interpretations lie two divergent visions of history. One, in which the Sphinx is securely anchored in the Fourth Dynasty, a masterpiece of Old Kingdom stonework. The other, in which it is the lone survivor of a forgotten civilization, a monument scarred by rains from a time when the Sahara was green. Neither vision can be proven beyond doubt. The evidence is ambiguous, as evidence so often is when measured against the scale of millennia. But the very ambiguity invites reflection. Because if even a monument as visible, as studied, as iconic as the Sphinx can spark such debate, what else might we have missed? How many other stones, weathered and anonymous, lie scattered in deserts, mountains, or beneath the sea, holding stories we have not yet learned how to read? The Sphinx, then, is more than a riddle carved in stone. It is a mirror held up to us, asking how willing we are to question the timeline we have built, how open we are to the possibility that civilization is older, more cyclical, and more fragile than we assume. Its gaze is eroded, its features blurred by time, yet it endures, and in its endurance, it beckons us to look not only at Egypt, but at the deep corridors of human history that may still be waiting to be rediscovered. If the Sphinx, and perhaps even the pyramids themselves, are older than we have been taught, then we are left with a haunting question. Who built them? For to entertain the possibility of monuments predating dynastic Egypt is to invite the idea of builders whose names have been lost, whose cultures dissolved, whose memories may only survive in fragments of myth and stone. The conventional answer that they were constructed by the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom ties them neatly into a chain of history we can trace and understand. But if the monuments predate that age, then their creators must be sought elsewhere, in the shadows of time, among peoples whose stories have not survived the millennia. Some researchers suggest that advanced hunter-gatherers, living during the last ice age, may have been capable of more than we credit them for. We often imagine such groups as small bands, moving lightly across the land, carrying only what they could on their backs. Yet archaeological discoveries have complicated that picture. Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, built more than 11,000 years ago, was raised by people who had not yet adopted agriculture, who were still living primarily as hunters and gatherers. And yet, they organized, they quarried, they carved massive stones, and they arranged them in great circles aligned with care. They built something monumental, not out of necessity, but out of imagination, ritual, meaning, perhaps even a message for the future. If hunter-gatherers could raise Göbekli Tepe, is it truly impossible to think that their contemporaries, or other groups before them, might have raised something similar on the banks of the Nile? We know so little of their capabilities, and even less of their ambitions. What we dismiss as primitive may have been, in the right places and times, something far more complex, a culture balanced between mobility and monumentality, leaving behind not sprawling cities but singular, enduring works of stone. Others suggest that if Ice Age civilizations did exist, they may not have resembled our own idea of civilization at all. They may not have built vast cities or left behind libraries of writing. Instead, they might have developed in ways unfamiliar to us, advanced in certain technologies such as stoneworking, navigation, or astronomy, while leaving fewer material traces in other areas. If such a culture had focused on knowledge encoded in the stars or in monumental architecture rather than on perishable records, then perhaps the pyramids are their surviving legacy. And then there are the myths. Egyptian tradition speaks of Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods walked the earth and bestowed knowledge upon humanity. To the Orthodox historian, this is a symbolic myth, a cultural memory of the dawn of Egyptian kingship. But to those who entertain deeper timelines, Zep Tepi may be a veiled echo of an earlier age, one when survivors of a lost world carried fragments of knowledge into the Nile Valley, seeding the beginnings of what would later flourish as dynastic Egypt. It is not only Egyptian myth that whispers of forgotten builders. Across the world, cultures speak of ancestors or gods who constructed great works before the present age of humanity. The Greeks told of the Titans, beings who shaped the land before the Olympians. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, who fashioned the world and raised megaliths before disappearing across the sea. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs believed their pyramids were built not by themselves but by giants who lived in an earlier sun, an earlier age. Myths of golden ages and vanished builders appear so widely that one wonders if they are not coincidence but memory distorted, mythologized, but rooted in something once real. From this perspective, the builders of the pyramids may not have been dynastic Egyptians at all, but the descendants of an Ice Age culture that flourished before the floods, before the rising seas drowned their coastlines. When the glaciers melted and the climate shifted, their cities and farmlands may have vanished beneath water or desert sands. Survivors, scattered and diminished, may have carried fragments of knowledge forward. And in the fertile Nile Valley, some of that knowledge may have been reborn, expressed not in writing or technology as we know it, but in the enduring solidity of stone. Mainstream historians rightly remind us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To posit a lost civilization is to stretch beyond the current limits of archaeology, into speculation that risks outrunning what the evidence can support. Yet the allure of the theory lies not in its certainty, but in its possibility. Because if the pyramids are older than we think, then we are not the first to dream of eternity. Others came before us, walked across the same deserts, gazed at the same stars, and left behind monuments to their vision. The builders of forgotten ages may never reveal themselves in names or records, but in the silence of the stones, in the myths of golden ages, and in the faint scars of erosion, they continue to beckon us. They remind us that history is not only what is written in books, but what is remembered in whispers, in ruins, and in mysteries too large to ignore. And so the question remains, who were they, these ancient builders? Were they Ice Age hunter-gatherers who reached heights we have underestimated? Survivors of a civilization undone by flood and fire, or simply the Egyptians themselves, inheritors of their own long-forgotten experiments in stone? We may never know for certain, but the very act of asking pulls us into deeper waters, where the line between myth and memory blurs, and where the possibility of civilizations before our own feels less like fantasy and more like a chapter we have not yet learned how to read. At the close of the last ice age, the Earth entered one of its most turbulent chapters. Vast glaciers that had gripped continents for tens of thousands of years began to retreat. With their melting came floods of unimaginable scale. Sea levels surged by more than 100 meters, drowning coastal plains and reshaping shorelines across the world. Lands that had been home to animals, rivers, and perhaps even people were swallowed forever. It was not a gentle change, but a violent one. Rapid shifts in climate, sudden bursts of meltwater, and the destruction of familiar landscapes. Imagine standing on one of those ancient coasts. The sea you had always known, steady and predictable, begins to creep higher year after year. Rivers swell, lakes spill over, fertile valleys turn into marshes, and finally the ocean surges inland, erasing villages, forests, and fields. In a single lifetime, whole regions would have been transformed. To those who lived through it, the event must have seemed like the end of the world. It is in this crucible of cataclysm that the idea of survivors emerges. If an Ice Age civilization did exist, it could not have endured these changes unscathed. But perhaps fragments of it, people carrying knowledge, traditions, and memories, managed to survive. They would have left their drowned homelands behind, moving inland or up river valleys, seeking new places to live. Along the way, they may have carried fragments of architecture, astronomy, and engineering, knowledge not in books or scripts, but in stories, skills, and symbols. This is where Egypt re-enters the picture. The Nile, flowing steadily through one of the most fertile valleys on Earth, may have offered refuge to survivors of these cataclysms. If knowledge was preserved by wanderers from drowned coasts, Egypt could have been the place where it was rekindled. A floodplain sustained by the annual rise of the river, abundant in food, rich in stone, and open to the sky, it would have been a canvas ready for memory to be reinscribed in stone. The pyramids, then, might not be inventions of the Fourth Dynasty alone, but echoes of something carried forward, fragments of an earlier tradition reborn after catastrophe. This theory finds resonance in myth. Across cultures, flood stories are among the most common of all human tales. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of Utnapishtim, who survived a deluge that wiped out the world. The Bible tells of Noah and his ark, chosen to preserve life through the rising waters. Hindu myth speaks of Manu, warned by a great fish of a flood that would cover the land. In Greek tradition, Deucalion and Pyrrha survived when Zeus unleashed waters upon humanity. Even in the Americas, the Pacific Islands, and the Arctic, stories of great floods appear again and again, often tied to themes of destruction, survival, and rebirth. To the skeptic, these are simply archetypal myths shared because floods are a common human experience. Rivers rise, storms surge, disasters happen, and people tell stories about them. But to others, the universality of the flood motif is more than coincidence. It may be a cultural memory of the great cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years. If so, then the flood myths are not just metaphor, but memory blurred and mythologized, but rooted in real events. Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, added his own voice to this tradition with the tale of Atlantis. He described a great civilization, rich in knowledge and power, that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, readers have debated whether this was allegory or history. But if we set Atlantis alongside the global chorus of flood myths, it becomes less a unique invention and more another echo of a shared human memory that once there was a world, a golden age, undone by water and fire. Could survivors of such a cataclysm have carried their knowledge into the future? Perhaps they were not builders of cities in the way we imagine, but custodians of certain skills, astronomy, geometry, stoneworking passed down like sacred trust. Perhaps, arriving in the Nile Valley, they shared fragments of this knowledge with those who would later become the Egyptians. In this light, the pyramids become more than tombs. They become beacons of continuity, structures designed to endure beyond any flood, any fire, any collapse, so that something of their makers would survive, even if their names and languages were forgotten. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious, pointing out that no direct evidence links Ice Age peoples to the pyramids. Yet the gaps in the record are vast. More than 99% of human history lies beyond written memory. a span of time where archaeology must rely on fragments, stone tools, cave art, scattered bones. If an advanced culture once flourished along Ice Age coasts, most of its evidence would now rest underwater, beyond easy reach. That silence leaves room for wonder, for speculation, and for the myths to breathe. The idea of survivors is not only about history, but about continuity. It suggests that knowledge is never fully lost, only scattered and reshaped. That across the rise and fall of ages, certain truths persist, whether carved in stone, aligned with the stars, or whispered in stories of floods and golden ages. The pyramids may be one such survival, enduring not only as monuments of Egypt, but as echoes of a civilization that refused to vanish completely into the sea. When we gaze at the pyramids today, what first overwhelms us is their size. Vast geometric mountains rising from the desert, they dwarf their surroundings and anchor the horizon. But when we step closer, when we look beyond their sheer bulk, another layer of astonishment appears. Precision. For all their weathering, for all the thousands of years that have scoured their surfaces, the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, still retain an accuracy that feels, even now, extraordinary. The base of the Great Pyramid stretches across more than 13 acres, and yet the difference between its longest and shortest sides is less than 20 centimeters. The corners meet so precisely that the entire structure is aligned to true north, with astonishing accuracy deviating by only a fraction of a degree. To align a building of such scale with such exactness would be a challenge even with modern surveying equipment. To imagine it being done 4,500 years ago, with nothing more than sighting rods, ropes, and shadows, stretches the imagination. How did they achieve this? Some suggest they watched the stars tracking the circumpolar constellations as they wheeled around the night sky, using them to find north. Others believe they studied the shadows of the sun at solstices and equinoxes, translating celestial rhythms onto the desert floor. Whatever the method, it required a level of patience, calculation, and skill that seems almost out of place in the Bronze Age. And the precision does not end there. The Great Pyramid is estimated to contain around 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 70 tons. The limestone blocks came from nearby quarries, but the granite beams, colossal slabs used in the king's chamber, were hauled from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers away. To move such masses without wheels, engines, or cranes across desert and river, and then lift them into place high within the structure, required an ingenuity we still struggle to fully reconstruct. The joins between the stones only deepen the mystery. In many places, the blocks fit so closely together that even a sheet of paper cannot slip between them. They are not uniform bricks, but irregular shapes, yet each one is cut and set with such care that they interlock seamlessly, distributing weight with remarkable stability. Modern masons, using diamond-tipped saws and steel tools, would pause at such tolerances. Yet here they are, achieved with copper chisels and pounding stones, or so we are told. Archaeologists have long debated the construction methods. Some argue for straight ramps stretching from the plateau to the pyramid's upper levels. Others propose spiraling ramps wrapped around the sides, dismantled as the pyramid rose. Still others imagine counterweight systems of sand and levers. Experimental reconstructions have shown that moving heavy blocks with ropes and sledges is possible, but scaling that effort to millions of stones, raised hundreds of feet into the air, remains daunting. No single theory answers every question. Perhaps the Egyptians combined methods, adapting as they built, solving problems with a flexibility we underestimate. And yet, even when explained, the achievement feels uncanny. To stand at the base of the Great Pyramid is to feel that human effort alone cannot fully account for the immensity before you. It is not that we cannot imagine how it was built, but that imagining it only deepens the wonder. Then there is the geometry. The pyramid's proportions seem to encode mathematical constants. The ratio of its height to the circumference of its base approximates 2 pi, the relationship between a circle and its diameter. Its slope corresponds closely to the golden ratio, a proportion echoed in seashells, flowers, and galaxies. The dimensions of its chambers, corridors, and galleries have invited endless interpretation. Some see in them astronomical alignments, others symbolic journeys of the soul, still others hints of forgotten knowledge. Were these relationships deliberate or coincidences born of practical design? Scholars argue both sides. Yet the possibility that ancient builders intentionally wove universal constants into their architecture is a tantalizing one. If so, what were they trying to say? That the pyramid was not just a tomb, but a statement of cosmic harmony, that its builders understood, in some way, the relationship between earth, sky, and mathematics, or that they intended it to endure not only as a monument to kings, but as a message to the future, a reminder that once, long ago, humans grasped truths that transcend time. It is here that the idea of inheritance re-enters the discussion. Could the proportions of the Great Pyramid reflect knowledge not invented in the Old Kingdom, but remembered fragments of geometry or astronomy carried from an earlier age? If survivors of Ice Age cultures preserved anything, it may have been this: not libraries or technologies, but principles. Principles expressed not in writing, but in stone, encoded into proportions and alignments that would survive long after languages faded. Comparisons to other megalithic sites strengthen the sense of mystery. At Baalbek in Lebanon, blocks weighing hundreds of tons form the foundation of a temple platform, stone so massive that even modern cranes strain to imagine moving them. At Puma Punku in Bolivia and nearby Tiwanaku, stones are cut with angles so precise they seem almost machined, yet date back thousands of years. At Stonehenge in England, megaliths were arranged to track solstices, echoing the pyramid's celestial alignments in a different form. Across the world, cultures separated by oceans appear to have shared an obsession with stone, with alignment, with endurance. Could this be coincidence? Independent invention arising from the universal human urge to mark the heavens? Or could it reflect a shared inheritance, a memory of an earlier world where such monuments were first imagined? If Ice Age peoples built in stone to endure the floods, perhaps their descendants carried that legacy outward, seeding traditions that blossomed in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Andes, and beyond. Of course, mainstream archaeology resists such sweeping connections. Each site, it insists, belongs to its own culture, its own context, its own history, and perhaps that is true. Yet the similarities remain: precision beyond expectation, alignments to sky and sun, proportions that whisper of cosmic order. Patterns so widespread invite questions, even if definitive answers elude us. Ultimately, what strikes us most about the pyramids is their endurance. Temples crumble, cities vanish, empires fall, but the pyramids remain. Their builders may have vanished into myth, their names eroded from memory, but the stones still stand, aligned to the earth and sky, speaking in the language of geometry. Whether born of Old Kingdom ambition or inherited from a forgotten age, they were designed to last. Not centuries, not dynasties, but millennia, and perhaps that is the greatest marvel of all, that they succeeded. For 4,500 years, the pyramids have withstood time, weather, and the shifting sands. They remain, vast and silent, guardians of secrets we may never fully unravel, and in their endurance, they remind us of something profound, that civilizations rise and fall, but certain truths, carved in stone, can outlast them all. When we linger on the pyramids long enough, another question begins to rise, a quieter one, but no less persistent. It is not just how they were built, but what might have been forgotten in the process. We look at the polished joints, the towering granite beams, the precise alignments, and we wonder if the builders had access to methods, tools, or understandings that have slipped away in the long corridors of time. Conventional archaeology insists that copper chisels, pounding stones, and simple sledges were enough. And perhaps they were. Yet the mind balks at the details. To imagine workers carving through Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones known, with soft copper, to picture them shaping blocks weighing 70 tons with such precision that they interlock seamlessly, to envision those stones being lifted and positioned hundreds of feet into the air with nothing but ropes and muscle. Possible, perhaps, but for many, the explanation feels incomplete, like a sketch missing the fullness of its color. This unease has given rise to theories of lost technologies. Not machines in the modern sense, not computers, cranes, or engines, but techniques of stone cutting, moving, or aligning that may once have existed and been erased. Some speculate about advanced methods of softening stone chemically, using plant-based acids or unknown compounds. There are accounts from later traditions, especially in South America, that hint at such things, legends of plants that could dissolve stone, allowing it to be shaped like clay before hardening again. No evidence survives, but the whispers are there. Others imagine that sound itself, vibration, resonance, might have been harnessed to move or shape rock. We know today that frequency can shatter glass, levitate droplets, and even manipulate particles with precision. Could ancient peoples, attentive to the rhythms of nature, have discovered principles of resonance that we no longer understand? Myths across cultures place deep significance on sound, on the sacred word, on the universe being sung or spoken into existence. Perhaps these are symbolic echoes of a deeper, forgotten practice. Still others envision hydraulic systems, water used as a tool of movement and lifting. The Nile, after all, was Egypt's lifeblood, its cycles of flood and retreat the metronome of its civilization. Could its waters also have been harnessed for construction? Barges may have carried stones downriver, yes, but some speculate further, suggesting internal water channels or buoyancy systems that allowed blocks to be floated upward, step by step, as the pyramid rose. It sounds impossible, and yet the pyramids themselves stand as proof that something extraordinary did happen. Such ideas, while speculative, are not without precedent in human creativity. Across the world, ancient feats strain our sense of possibility. In Lebanon, the platform at Baalbek contains blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, the largest cut stones on earth, arranged in place with confidence we can scarcely comprehend. Even today, modern cranes would struggle with them. How, then, were they moved, set, and aligned thousands of years ago? In Bolivia, at Pumapunku, stones of andesite lie scattered across the altiplano. Some are carved with right angles so sharp and holes so precise that they resemble machine work. And yet they are thousands of years old, attributed to cultures whose tools should not have been capable of such perfection. On Easter Island, the Moai statues, some weighing 80 tons, were transported miles across uneven terrain and erected upright. Oral traditions speak of them walking into place, an image that to modern ears sounds impossible, yet perhaps preserves memory of a clever technique, now forgotten. At Nan Madol in Micronesia, entire islets were built on a reef using prismatic basalt columns stacked into walls and canals. How such massive stones were quarried, transported, and assembled in the middle of the Pacific remains unclear. And beneath the ocean, off the coast of Japan, lies the Yonaguni Monument. Terraces, steps, and walls carved into the seabed. Some argue it is natural, others believe it is artificial, the remnant of a drowned city from a time when seas were lower. If the latter, it would mean that Ice Age peoples were carving in stone at monumental scales long before dynasties rose in Egypt. Taken together, these sites form a chorus. Across the world, Cultures separated by oceans appear to have built in ways that exceed practical necessity. Stones larger than needed, alignments more precise than required, geometries echoing cosmic order. To the orthodox scholar, each is an isolated marvel, explained by ingenuity, persistence, and clever engineering. To the speculative mind, they are connected, scattered fingerprints of a knowledge that once spread across the earth, only to be drowned, eroded, or erased, leaving behind its hardest fragments in stone. Here myth enters the picture once more. Egyptian tradition speaks of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked among humans and taught them arts and sciences. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was remembered as the bringer of knowledge. In South America, Viracocha emerged from the sea to instruct humanity before vanishing. Polynesian legends tell of ancestors with the power to raise great stones. These myths may be symbolic, yes, but perhaps they are also memories of encounters with survivors, carriers of knowledge from an earlier, shattered world. To those who received it, their skills would have seemed otherworldly, their origins blurred until memory became myth. Sound and water, gods and floods, themes recur across traditions. They remind us that knowledge is not always lost in silence. Sometimes it echoes in story, encoded as metaphor when its practical meaning has faded. What if sound once moved stones, and myths remembered it as the voice of gods? What if hydraulics were used to raise blocks, remembered as the waters of creation? What if geometry itself, encoded in pyramids and megaliths, was a language meant to transcend forgetting? Of course, mainstream archaeology offers its necessary caution. There are no machines buried in the sands, no blueprints of forgotten devices, no undeniable proof of exotic technologies. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, but perhaps that evidence was never meant to survive in forms we expect. Technologies of endurance may look different from ours, not gears and engines, but ratios, alignments, and stone. Knowledge preserved in forms immune to fire, flood, and decay. The pyramids, then, may not be anomalies of labor alone, but intentional memory devices. Their sheer scale, their mathematical precision, their alignment with earth and sky. These qualities may be the true technology, not a machine to generate power, but a machine to generate remembrance. A vault for knowledge, designed to withstand the fragility of culture. And so the pyramids invite us to imagine not just the world of the Old Kingdom, but the worlds before it. Worlds where people may have dreamed differently, worked with forces we no longer grasp, and built with intentions not only to honor their dead, but to outlast death itself. Whether those intentions were realized with forgotten techniques or simply with determination magnified across generations, the result is the same. Structures that continue to puzzle and inspire us, millennia after their makers are gone. Perhaps this is the true legacy of lost technologies. Not that we have proof of them, but that we feel their absence, that we sense, in the silence of stone, that something has slipped from our hands. And that in imagining it, we remember not only what might have been, but what could yet be rediscovered. When night falls over the Giza plateau, the pyramids shift their presence. By day, they are monuments of stone, immense, immovable, heavy with age. But under the sky, they become something different, instruments of alignment, mirrors of the heavens, stone constellations locked in dialogue with the stars. For thousands of years, humanity has looked upward for meaning. The sky is the oldest text we have ever read, its stars forming patterns that guided migration, agriculture, myth, and memory. The Egyptians, like so many ancient cultures, were astronomers of the naked eye, their nights free of modern light, their horizons wide and dark. To them, the stars were not cold spheres of burning gas, but eternal beings, guides, guardians, and gods. It is here that the first and most famous alignment of the Giza pyramids emerges. their apparent reflection of Orion's belt. 3 pyramids rising on the desert, their sizes and positions corresponding, some argue, to the 3 stars of Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. 2 nearly in line, the third offset slightly to the side, just as the stars appear in the sky. This idea, popularized by Robert Bauval in the 1990s as part of the Orion correlation theory, suggested that the pyramids were not simply tombs but star markers built to mirror the heavens on Earth. To the ancient Egyptians, Orion was Osiris, the god of death, rebirth, and eternity. The constellation rising in the night sky symbolized the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife, his unification with the divine. If the pyramids were aligned to Orion's belt, then their purpose expanded beyond the funerary. They became a cosmic machine, uniting king, earth, and sky in eternal resonance. But the theory deepens further with the phenomenon of precession. The Earth wobbles slowly on its axis, completing a cycle every 26,0 years. This motion shifts the apparent positions of stars over millennia. Orion's belt, as it appears today, is not the same Orion seen in 2500 BCE. Instead, Bauval argued, the pyramid alignment matched Orion's stars far more closely around 10,500 BCE, long before dynastic Egypt. If true, the pyramids may have been designed as a star map to lock the heavens of that epoch into stone. What does this mean? One possibility is that the builders had knowledge of precession long before it was rediscovered by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE. Another is that the monuments encode a memory that 10,500 BCE, at the end of the Ice Age, was considered a sacred moment, a golden age worth immortalizing. The Sphinx adds weight to this idea, for it gazes eastward, directly at the rising sun on the equinox. Around 10,500 BCE, that horizon was marked by the constellation of Leo the Lion. A lion-shaped monument facing Leo, 3 pyramids echoing Orion's belt. Was this a deliberate message across ages? Skeptics argue that such alignments are coincidences. The human mind is prone to seeing patterns where none exist, and stars can be made to fit many configurations. The pyramid's orientation, they insist, can be explained by practical considerations of geography, religion, and symmetry. And yet the possibility lingers, because the Egyptians did orient their structures with celestial care. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, its error less than 1/20th of a degree. Temples along the Nile are often aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. Astronomy was woven into their architecture. To suggest that Giza, the greatest of their works, carried no celestial symbolism feels almost more unlikely than the reverse. If the Orion alignment is real, then the pyramids are not only tombs, not only monuments, but cosmic anchors, bridges between heaven and earth. They embody the Egyptian belief in Ma'at, cosmic order, balance, harmony. The pharaoh was not just a ruler of men, but the axis through which this order flowed. His pyramid, aligned to the stars, ensured that order was maintained beyond death, that life and cosmos remained entwined. Beyond Egypt, other monuments echo this celestial obsession. At Stonehenge, the great trilithons align with solstice, sunrise, and sunset. At Chichen Itza, the pyramid of Kukulkan casts a serpent-shaped shadow during equinox, linking sky, sun, and stone in a cosmic dance. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Avenue of the Dead aligns with the setting of the Pleiades. Around the world, ancient builders sought to anchor heaven to earth, inscribing the stars into stone. Why? Perhaps to map the divine order, to make visible the harmony they sensed above. Perhaps to create permanence, to lock into the earth, a star pattern that would shift and fade with precession, ensuring it would never be forgotten. Or perhaps as messages, not to their contemporaries but to us, to say, we knew, we saw. we aligned ourselves to eternity. If we allow ourselves to imagine that the Giza pyramids preserve a memory of 500 BCE, then the implications stretch deep. It would mean that the builders or those who taught them carried knowledge across ages, knowledge of stars and cycles that takes thousands of years to observe. It would suggest continuity, inheritance, or survival from a culture erased by flood and fire. A culture that sought to leave behind not fragile words but monuments aligned with the eternal heavens, ensuring that even if all else was lost, their message would endure. And so, under the stars, the pyramids transform. They are no longer only tombs or achievements of engineering. They are mirrors of Orion, echoes of Leo, memories of cycles longer than civilizations. Their stones speak not only of kings and dynasties, but of time itself, of the slow turning of the heavens, of ages rising and falling like the stars that fade and return. To look at them by starlight is to feel that humanity is part of a larger rhythm, that civilizations, like stars, are born, blaze and fade, but that some truths, etched in stone, aligned to the cosmos, endure beyond the fall of worlds. If the pyramids echo the stars above, then perhaps they were never meant to be tombs alone. Perhaps they were also clocks, vast stone instruments designed to track the great cycles of the heavens. In this view, they are not merely monuments to kings but messages for eternity, timekeepers that do not measure hours or days, but the turning of ages. Ancient cultures often looked to the sky not only for wonder, but for order. The sun marked the day, the moon the month, the stars the year. Yet beyond these familiar cycles lies a slower rhythm, one so vast it takes tens of thousands of years to unfold. The precession of the equinoxes. The earth wobbles like a spinning top, its axis tracing a circle that completes only once every 26 years. As it does, the background stars seen at dawn on the equinox shift, moving slowly from one constellation to the next. To recognize this requires patience, observation, and records passed down across generations, and attention to time far beyond the span of a human life. Some believe the builders of Giza encoded this precession in stone, the pyramid's alignment to Orion and the Sphinx's gaze toward the east appear to anchor a specific moment in the cycle, around 500 BCE. At that time, the constellation of Leo would have risen directly where the Sphinx looks, while Orion's belt would have mirrored the pyramids with uncanny precision. Together, lion and hunter marked the sky, a cosmic tableau carved into heaven and earth. If true, then Giza is not simply an old kingdom necropolis, but a star clock, set to a time when the earth was emerging from the Ice Age. Was this deliberate? Did the builders wish to commemorate that age, to preserve its memory in stone? Or was it a way of speaking to the future, a signal across the abyss of time? We were here. We knew the cycle. Remember us when it comes again. The pyramids themselves support this interpretation in subtle ways. The shafts of the Great Pyramid, narrow passages once thought to be ventilation, align with key stars, Orion's belt, Sirius, and the circumpolar stars that never set. These alignments are not random. They suggest deliberate calibration, as though the pyramid were not only a tomb but a map, a marker, a device to orient the soul in both space and time. The Sphinx strengthens the case. Its leonine form, worn and eroded, may have symbolized the constellation of Leo. Its eternal gaze at the equinox sunrise ties it to the cycle of rebirth, the eternal return of light after darkness. If its erosion indeed points to a date far older than 2500 BCE, then perhaps it is the anchor of the whole complex. The Lion of Leo watching the rising sun of 500 BCE, paired with Orion's belt encoded in the pyramids. Lion and hunter, east and south, horizon and sky. A cosmic alignment locked into stone, binding heaven and earth in eternal dialogue. Why would such monuments be built? Perhaps to survive the forgetting. Civilizations rise and fall, but the stars endure. By tying stone to sky, the builders ensured that even if languages vanished, even if empires crumbled, the message would remain. Anyone in any age could look upward, trace Orion, trace Leo, and see the connection. The monuments are not only memory devices but cosmic markers, designed to outlast cataclysm, war, and time itself. Around the world, we see echoes of this same impulse. The Maya tracked procession through their long count calendar, linking ages of humanity to cosmic cycles. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the temple's layout encodes astronomical cycles, mapping the movement of Venus and the Moon. In the Andes, the Inca aligned temples and sightlines to solstice sunrises. At Stonehenge, equinoxes and solstices were marked in stone. Across cultures, the sky was not simply backdrop, but a clock, a storybook written in stars, to be read and remembered. Could it be that the pyramids and Sphinx represent the most ambitious version of this impulse? Not only to track the cycles of the heavens for their own people, but to preserve the knowledge for all who would come after. If so, then they are less monuments of death than monuments of survival, built not for individuals but for humanity itself. And here speculation stretches further. Some ask whether such monuments were meant not only for us, but for others, for any intelligence, human or otherwise, who might one day walk the earth. A pyramid, after all, is a universal shape, simple, enduring, almost impossible to destroy. Aligned to stars, it becomes a beacon, a message carved in universal language, mathematics, astronomy, geometry. It says, "We were here, we saw the sky, we knew the cycles of time." Of course, mainstream archaeology resists such interpretations. To it, the pyramids are funerary monuments, expressions of pharaonic power, symbols of state and religion, and they are. But perhaps they are also more. Perhaps the genius of the pyramids lies not in one purpose, but many. Tomb, temple, machine, marker, memory. Human achievements are rarely simple, and their meanings rarely singular. If we allow ourselves to imagine the pyramids as cosmic timekeepers, then they become not only Egyptian wonders but human wonders, or even planetary wonders. They embody an urge that transcends culture, the desire to anchor ourselves to something eternal, to inscribe our fleeting lives into the fabric of the cosmos. The builders may not have spoken our language, but their monuments speak to us still in the geometry of stone, in the rhythm of stars, in the silence of the desert beneath the endless night sky. And so the pyramids endure not only as stone, but as time. They are clocks that do not tick, calendars that do not turn, but which nonetheless remind us of cycles vast and patient. They whisper that we are part of something larger, that our days and dynasties are brief sparks in a greater rhythm. They urge us to look upward, to remember the heavens, to see ourselves not only as inhabitants of Earth, but as participants in the cosmic dance. Perhaps that is why they still move us. Not because we know their purpose with certainty, but because they remind us that purpose itself can be larger than we imagine. That civilizations may pass, but the stars endure, and that in aligning ourselves with them, we, too, can reach beyond the limits of time. When stone falls silent, it is myth that continues the story. Across the world, cultures have carried memories not in granite and limestone, but in words, stories spoken and sung, passed from generation to generation until their origins blur into legend. For some, these myths are only allegory. For others, they may be fragments of history, cultural fossils, echoes of real events refracted through the lens of memory. In Egypt, one such myth is Zep Tepi, the first time. This was not simply the beginning of kingship, but the dawn of everything, an age when gods walked the earth, when order was established out of chaos, when wisdom was given to humanity. The stories tell of divine beings who taught the arts of writing, agriculture, and architecture, who established temples and measured the heavens. To mainstream historians, Zep-Tepi is symbolic, a mythic retelling of the foundation of Egypt's state religion. But to those who look deeper, it whispers of something older, a memory of an age before the dynasties, before the pyramids, perhaps even before the floods of the Ice Age had ended. It is not only Egypt that remembers a first time. In Mesopotamia, the Enuma Elish describes the ordering of the world from primordial waters. In Mesoamerica, the Maya spoke of previous worlds destroyed and remade. In India, the cycle of yugas describes ages of rising and falling wisdom, each ending in cataclysm. These myths, scattered across continents, share a common thread, a belief that our world is not the first, but one of many iterations. And often, between these ages, comes a flood. Flood myths are among the most universal stories humanity tells. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a great deluge that wiped away all life, survived only by Utnapishtim, who built a vessel to preserve his family and the seeds of the earth. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds an ark, guided by divine warning. In Hindu tradition, Manu is told by a great fish to construct a boat before the waters rise. In Greek myth, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive when Zeus sends a flood to destroy humanity. In the Americas, Polynesia, Australia, and Africa, similar stories abound: waters rising, worlds ending, survivors carrying knowledge into the next age. To the skeptic, these are archetypes. Floods are common, devastating events. River valleys flood, coasts are swallowed by storms. It is natural that cultures would create stories to explain and endure them. But to the speculative mind, the ubiquity of the flood myth suggests something more, a shared memory of the cataclysms at the end of the Ice Age. When glaciers melted, seas rose more than 100 meters, and coastlines across the world were drowned. Imagine villages swallowed, fertile plains lost, whole populations displaced. To those who lived through it, the event would have seemed apocalyptic. To their descendants, it would be remembered not as history but as myth. Oral tradition has a persistence we often underestimate. Recent studies of Aboriginal Australian myths suggest that some stories recall rising seas that drowned coastal lands more than 70 years ago. If such memories can endure that long, carried in story, then perhaps flood myths around the world do preserve real echoes of Ice Age events. Perhaps Zep-Tepi and its global cousins are not only symbolic beginnings, but distant recollections of a time when civilizations or proto-civilizations rose and fell before the waters. If so, then the pyramids and the Sphinx may be their stone counterparts. Myths made manifest, cultural memory translated into architecture. A society determined not only to remember but to be remembered, to anchor its myth in stone so that even if words failed, the message would remain. We were here, we survived the first flood, we built again. This raises a tantalizing possibility, that myths may encode real fragments of forgotten history. The gods of Zep-Tepi, the culture bringers of Mesoamerica, the flood survivors of Mesopotamia, what if these were not divine beings but human ones? Survivors of earlier civilizations, carrying fragments of knowledge into younger societies, remembered by later generations as gods because their wisdom seemed otherworldly. Over time, memory became story, story became myth, and myth became religion. But beneath it all, there may be a kernel of truth. And yet, the line between myth and memory is fragile. We cannot test myths the way we test stone. They are fluid, changing with each telling, reshaped by culture and context. To take them literally is to risk misreading metaphor as fact. But to dismiss them entirely is to risk ignoring the only traces of histories that left no monuments behind. Myths may not be literal, but they may be truthful in another sense, revealing not what happened exactly, but that something happened, something vast enough to leave an imprint on the collective human imagination. In this way, myths become a second archaeology, not of artifacts, but of memory. Just as archaeologists sift through layers of soil for fragments of pottery, so too can we sift through stories for fragments of memory. Floods, golden ages, gods teaching humans, first times and lost times, these recurring motifs may be the cultural fossils of events too distant for history, but too important to be forgotten. If the pyramids are cosmic timekeepers, then myths are their narrative counterpart, stories as clocks, measuring not the movement of stars, but the cycles of human experience. Both stone and story remind us that we may not be the first to rise, nor the last to fall. Both whisper that civilizations are fragile, but memory, whether in granite or in tale, can endure. And so, in the silence of myth, we hear the same question as in the silence of the stones. What came before us? And how much of it have we already forgotten? Across the ancient world, myths tell of beings who came before god-kings, culture-bringers, divine teachers who bestowed upon humanity the tools of civilization. To modern ears, they sound like legends, symbolic stories to explain origins. But what if they were something more? What if these gods were not deities of the heavens, but survivors of an earlier world, remnants of a civilization undone by flood and fire, whose knowledge seemed so extraordinary to later peoples that it could only be remembered as divine? Egyptian tradition speaks of Zep-Tepi, the first time, when gods ruled upon the earth and gave humanity the gifts of writing, agriculture, and architecture. Among them was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, who taught the arts of measurement, timekeeping, and language. Another was Osiris, associated with resurrection and rebirth, who brought agriculture and order to the land. To mainstream Egyptology, these are mythic archetypes, personifications of natural cycles and cultural innovations. Yet some suggest that behind these gods may lie memories of real figures, leaders, or survivors, whose wisdom guided the early Nile Valley into its golden age. In Mesopotamia, the same pattern appears. The Sumerians told of the Apkallu, semi-divine sages sent by the god Enki to teach humanity crafts, laws, and knowledge after the Great Flood. These beings were often depicted as part human, part fish, amphibious figures who emerged from the waters to bring wisdom. The resemblance to flood survivors, carrying skills from drowned coastlines into new lands, is striking. Were these Apkallu mythic beings, or the distant memory of people who truly emerged from the waters of a lost world? In the Andes, Viracocha was remembered as a tall, bearded figure who came after a cataclysm to teach agriculture, stoneworking, and astronomy before departing across the sea. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan were feathered serpents, gods of wisdom and creation, yet often described in human form as teachers who promised to return. Polynesian legends speak of ancestors who raised great stoneworks and then disappeared into the mists. In Greece, the Titans were overthrown by Olympians, yet were credited with shaping the land itself, a memory of an earlier race supplanted by a younger one. Everywhere we look, cultures speak of gods or godlike ancestors who bestowed knowledge. And always, this knowledge is not trivial. It is the foundation of civilization: how to grow crops, how to build, how to measure time by the heavens. These are not the gifts of myth alone, they are the technologies of survival. Why would so many cultures, separated by oceans, invent such similar stories? One answer is archetype, that humanity, everywhere, created myths to explain the leap from survival to civilization. Another is cultural diffusion, that tales spread from one region to another, reshaped into local forms. But a third possibility whispers beneath these, that the gods were survivors. that when the Ice Age ended and seas rose, when floods drowned fertile plains and cities were lost, small groups carried fragments of their culture into the future. Stripped of their former world, they became wanderers, culture bearers, arriving among less complex societies with knowledge of farming, astronomy, and architecture. To those they taught, their wisdom seemed miraculous, and so they were remembered as gods. Over time, as generations passed, the line between human and divine blurred. Oral traditions amplified their deeds, symbols replaced memories, and the survivors became mythologized as beings beyond mortal comprehension. But within the myths may still lie fragments of memory distorted, refracted, yet pointing to real events. This idea is speculative, yes, but it resonates with patterns we know. After all, when advanced and isolated societies meet, their exchanges often take on mythic proportions. To a people unfamiliar with writing, a single book may seem magical. To a people without metallurgy, the gift of iron is transformative. If such encounters occurred in the deep past between survivors of Ice Age cultures and early post-flood peoples, it is not hard to see how they might have been. Remembered as encounters with gods. Take the example of architecture. Myths around the world describe gods teaching humans how to build. In Egypt, Thoth gave the art of measurement, while Imhotep, later deified, was remembered as the master architect. In Mesopotamia, the Abkalu instructed on building temples. In the Andes, Viracocha's influence was tied to megalithic construction. Even in biblical tradition, it is the sons of God who reveal secrets to humanity before the flood. Why this repeated emphasis on building? Perhaps because architecture is memory in stone. Survivors who had seen cities lost to floods may have sought to ensure that the next iteration would endure through monuments, temples, and pyramids designed not just as shelters, but as time capsules. The Sphinx, the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, the megaliths of Malta, the stone platforms of Polynesia, each might be the echo of this impulse. Not random structures, but deliberate attempts to anchor memory in matter, to ensure that even if myth faltered, stone would speak. And perhaps this is why the gods so often bring both architecture and astronomy. For to align stone with stars is to link earth and sky, to create a message written not only in rock but in the cosmos itself. Skeptics remind us that we must tread carefully. Myths are malleable, shaped by culture and context. To see history, where there is metaphor, risks distortion. Yet myths are not arbitrary. They emerge from the deep psyche, from memory, from the need to explain real experience. They may not describe literal gods, but they may remember extraordinary people. And extraordinary people, arriving in times of chaos, might well have seemed divine. The question then becomes, if the gods were survivors, what civilization did they come from? Was it an Ice Age culture drowned beneath the seas? Was it scattered peoples from fertile plains like Doggerland in Europe, Sunderland in Southeast Asia, or the coasts of the Americas, all lands lost to the floods of 12,000 years ago? Or was it something else entirely, an older cycle of humanity that rose, fell, and left behind only fragments in myth and stone? We may never know. But in asking, we open ourselves to the possibility that humanity's story is not a straight ascent, but a cycle of rise, fall, survival, and remembrance. Myths then become more than stories. They are bridges between worlds, connecting us to ancestors we cannot name, to civilizations we cannot prove, but whose whispers still reach us in the language of gods. And so the question remains, were the gods ever gods at all? Or were they simply us human survivors of an older age, remembered through the long night of forgetting as something greater than human, their memory shining across time like constellations we still trace in the sky? If the pyramids and the Sphinx are echoes of an older memory, they are not alone in their strangeness. Scattered across the earth are other monuments, Other vast works of stone that raise the same quiet question: who built these, and why? Some are famous, visited by millions. Others lie half buried, half forgotten, their origins obscured by time. Yet together they form a pattern, a global chorus of megaliths that seems to suggest a tradition, older, broader, and more mysterious than we usually assume. We begin at Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s, it overturned much of what we thought we knew about early civilization. Here, on a hilltop buried for millennia, archaeologists uncovered massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons. Arranged in great circles, carved into their surfaces were intricate images: foxes, vultures, scorpions, wild boar, and abstract symbols whose meaning we still do not understand. The site has been dated to around 9,600 BCE, more than 12,000 years ago, at the very dawn of agriculture. According to our old models, such a site should not exist. Monumental architecture, it was believed, arose only after agriculture, cities, and states created the social complexity needed to support such labor. Yet Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers, people with no writing, no metal, no domesticated animals beyond the dog. They gathered, they carved, they raised pillars, and they aligned them with the heavens. It was not necessity that drove them, but vision and impulse to create something enduring, something transcendent. Göbekli Tepe forces us to reconsider. If hunter-gatherers could raise such monuments 12,000 years ago, what else might have been possible in other places, at other times? And how many such sites lie buried still, erased by floods, erosion, or time? From Turkey we travel to England, to the windswept Salisbury Plain. Here stands Stonehenge, perhaps the most iconic megalithic monument in the world. Its great trilithons, massive uprights capped with lintel stones, form a circle aligned with the solstices. On midsummer's dawn, the sun rises perfectly over the heel stone, casting its light into the heart of the circle. Stonehenge was not built all at once, but over centuries, its stones carried from quarries dozens, even hundreds of miles away. Its builders, like those of Göbekli Tepe, were not a centralized state but communities drawn together by a shared vision, people for whom the labor of stone was worth generations of effort. Cross the oceans, and we arrive at Pumapunku in Bolivia, high on the Andean Altiplano. Here, shattered across the plateau, lie blocks of andesite so precisely carved that they fit together like pieces of a machine. Some contain perfect right angles and bored holes, as if drilled with tools of great sophistication, and yet the site is thousands of years old. Its builders long vanished, its purpose still debated. To the Inca who came later, the site was the work of Viracocha, the god who taught humanity after the flood. To modern eyes, it is one of the most enigmatic megalithic ruins on Earth. In the Pacific, on the island of Pohnpei, lies Nan Madol, a city of stone built upon a reef. Its walls are constructed of massive basalt columns, stacked like logs to form islets separated by canals, earning it the name Venice of the Pacific. No one knows exactly how the builders transported and placed such enormous stones on the reef, nor why the city was eventually abandoned. Legend speaks of two brothers who summoned the stones with magic, their feats preserved in oral tradition as something more than human. Even beneath the sea, the pattern continues. Off the coast of Japan lies the Yonaguni Monument, a massive structure of terraces, steps, and walls carved into the seabed. Some argue it is a natural formation, shaped by geological forces. Others believe it to be artificial, a drowned site from before the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age. If the latter, it may date back more than 10,000 years, to a time when coastlines stretched farther and civilizations may have flourished on lands now lost to the ocean. Taken individually, Each of these sites is a marvel. Taken together, they form a pattern too striking to ignore. Across continents and oceans, across thousands of years, humanity has built in stone on a scale that defies necessity. They did not raise these monuments for survival, for food, water, or shelter, but for something deeper: memory, meaning, connection to the cosmos. Whether aligned to solstices, adorned with symbols, or built in impossible precision, these structures speak of a global impulse, a shared human tradition of anchoring eternity in stone. What are we to make of this? The orthodox view holds that megaliths arose independently in different cultures, the product of human ingenuity repeated in parallel. And indeed, humans everywhere share the same sky, the same need for meaning, the same capacity for labor. But the speculative mind wonders, could there have been a deeper connection? Could there have been a global tradition, older than we assume, linking these sites through memory, myth, or even direct contact? We know that seas were lower during the Ice Age, that coastlines now drowned would have connected lands and peoples more easily. We know that oral traditions can preserve memories for thousands of years. Could a network of cultures, scattered by flood and cataclysm, have carried fragments of a megalithic tradition into new lands, each adapting it in their own way? Could the gods and survivors of myth have seeded not only knowledge, but the very idea of building in stone monuments that would endure when all else was lost? The parallels invite us to wonder. Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, Puma Punku, Nan Madol, Yonaguni, different in form, but united in mystery. Each challenges our assumptions about what was possible. Each whispers of knowledge we do not fully understand. And each reminds us that the human story may be far older, far stranger, and far more interconnected than we have yet dared to imagine. If megaliths appear across the globe, scattered like great stones in a forgotten mosaic, one question presses against the silence. Were the builders connected? Did they labor in isolation, each culture inventing its own monuments anew? Or were they participants in something larger, a network of ideas, of stories, perhaps even of journeys that stretched across seas now long vanished? To ask this is to touch upon one of the great mysteries of prehistory: the sea. For most of human time, the sea was not a barrier but a bridge. Long before roads or railways, long before the wheel itself, humanity had boats. Archaeological finds confirm that early humans reached Australia by sea at least 60 years ago, crossing vast distances of open water. By the end of the Ice Age, people had already spread across every continent but Antarctica. Wherever rivers flowed, lakes shimmered, or coastlines stretched, water carried them. During the Ice Age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Coastlines extended far beyond their modern borders. Vast tracts of land now submerged would have connected peoples who today seem isolated. The North Sea, now cold and deep, once held Doggerland, a fertile plain linking Britain to continental Europe, home to rivers, lakes, and forests where people hunted and thrived. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf formed Sundaland, a vast subcontinent uniting the islands of Indonesia with the Asian mainland. In the Caribbean, shorelines reached farther, linking islands that are now separated by deep channels. These lost lands, drowned when the glaciers melted, may have been homelands of cultures whose memories survive only in myth. If advanced hunter-gatherers or early agricultural peoples once flourished in these drowned regions, their connections may have been maritime. Boats could carry not only people but stories, symbols, and practices. Across oceans, currents flow like rivers, guiding even simple craft along predictable routes. Polynesians, using only stars, waves, and birds as guides, navigated the Pacific long before modern instruments. Could Ice Age peoples, with similar observational skill, have traversed coastlines and seas, weaving together a web of cultural exchange that we have long since forgotten? hints of such a network surface in stone and story. The Bimini Road, off the coast of the Bahamas, is a formation of massive blocks that some claim is a sunken roadway or harbour, perhaps a remnant of Plato's Atlantis. Mainstream geology identifies it as natural beach rock fractured by tides, but its regularity, its alignment, continues to inspire speculation. If true, it would be part of a larger tradition of maritime cultures building along coasts now drowned by rising seas. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument lies beneath the waves, with terraces and steps that suggest human design, whether natural or artificial. Its very existence invites the question: if even one such site proves to be man-made, then human history stretches far deeper than our textbooks allow. Doggerland, though now buried beneath the North Sea, has yielded artifacts, tools, bones, traces of settlement. It was a real place, home to real people. When the seas rose, they were forced to move inland, their landscapes swallowed forever. Could their displacement, repeated across the globe, have scattered survivors carrying fragments of memory, stories of drowned lands, and traditions of building that later blossomed into megaliths? Legends of lost lands echo across cultures. Atlantis, described by Plato, was said to have vanished beneath the waves in a single night of catastrophe. In India, myths speak of Dwarka, a city swallowed by the sea, its ruins now claimed to have been glimpsed beneath the waters of Gujarat. In Celtic lore, Lyonesse was a land west of Cornwall, drowned by the ocean. In the Pacific, oral traditions recall lands swallowed by the sea, forcing migrations across vast distances. In each case, the theme is the same: a world lost to rising waters, remembered in fragments of story and song. If these are cultural fossils of real events, the end of the Ice Age, the drowning of coastlines, then the survivors may have carried more than memories. They may have carried practices, building in stone, aligning to the stars, encoding knowledge in monuments meant to endure. Spread across new homelands, these traditions may have blossomed into the megalithic cultures we see scattered around the world. Mainstream archaeology emphasizes independent invention, that people everywhere, seeking meaning in the sky and permanence in stone, arrived at similar solutions. And this is plausible. But the possibility of connection remains. Human beings are travelers by nature. If they could cross to Australia 60 years ago, why not from one Ice Age coast to another? Why not along rivers and seas, linking communities in ways we have yet to rediscover? Perhaps this is the forgotten network, not an empire, not a single civilization, but a web of cultures linked by water, by memory, by the impulse to endure, a network erased when the seas rose, leaving only scattered stones and myths as its remnants. A network that whispers to us now through Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, Pumapunku, Nan Madol, Yonaguni, and countless other sites, each one a node, a signal, a fragment of a story larger than any one place. If true, then the megaliths are not isolated mysteries but parts of a single puzzle. Together they suggest that humanity has always been more connected, more capable, and more enduring than we assume. They remind us that civilizations may vanish, but their echoes linger in stone, in story, and perhaps in the very currents of the sea that once carried them. And so, when we look at these monuments, we should not only ask who built them, but who connected them. For in their silence, they may be telling us of a forgotten world, not a single city or empire, but a global rhythm, a maritime culture that rose before the flood and then vanished, leaving only whispers in the deep. For all the speculation about lost civilizations, drowned coastlines, and megalithic networks, there remains a formidable obstacle: archaeology itself. Mainstream scholars, the custodians of our historical timeline, resist radical redatings of monuments like the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, or Yonaguni. They do so not from malice or fear, but from principle. The principle that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. To archaeology, context is everything. A monument is not only stone, it is pottery, tools, inscriptions, settlements, and burials. These are the threads that weave human culture into history. When a site is dated, it is not only the structure itself, but the materials around it. The charcoal from a hearth, the style of a tool, the sequence of strata beneath the soil. Without these, a stone is mute, and to assign it an age beyond its context is to risk fantasy. This is why the pyramids remain firmly placed in the Old Kingdom in mainstream chronology. Hieroglyphs naming Khufu, graffiti from work gangs, nearby tombs of officials all anchor the pyramids in the 4th dynasty, around 2600 BCE. Similarly, Stonehenge is dated by the bones, tools, and traces of feasts left behind by its builders, placing its construction in the 3rd millennium BCE. Archaeology resists pushing these dates back not out of stubbornness, but because the broader cultural record does not support it. Yet here lies the problem. The Earth itself erases evidence. Erosion, tectonics, volcanic activity, and rising seas conspire to wipe clean the slate of deep time. Less than 1% of Earth's surface is older than 2 billion years. Much younger layers, rich with human traces, are constantly recycled. Organic materials rot, metals corrode, wood burns. If a civilization had risen before the flood, how much of it would survive? How much of it would we recognize as human at all? Archaeology, bound to the material record, cannot easily accept what leaves no artifacts behind. To mainstream scholars, a lost Ice Age civilization is improbable because no pottery shards, no tools, no inscriptions have yet surfaced in unambiguous context. To them, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. And yet, to the speculative mind, the absence may be exactly what we should expect. 12,000 years is a long time. Whole landscapes have vanished beneath the sea. What is remarkable is not that evidence is scarce, but that anything at all might have survived. This tension creates a divide. On one side, archaeology insists on caution, on rigor, on the principle that claims must be supported by verifiable data. On the other, imagination pushes against the silence, suggesting that myths and monuments may be evidence of another kind evidence, not of pottery and bone, but of memory and intent. Archaeologists also resist radical redating because of continuity. Civilizations, they argue, do not appear fully formed. They leave traces of evolution, smaller structures that lead to larger ones, simpler tools that give rise to complex ones. To suggest that the pyramids are 10,000 years old disrupts this sequence, requiring not only a lost civilization but the complete disappearance of its precursors and successors. For scholars, this gap is too wide, too silent, and yet gaps exist everywhere in the record. Less than a fraction of 1% of human settlements have been excavated. Whole cultures remain unknown to us, their names never recorded, their stories never told. What we call history is a thin thread stretched across a vast, dark canvas of prehistory. To dismiss the possibility of forgotten chapters because we have not yet found them may be as much an act of faith as it is of caution. The principle of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is both a safeguard and a barrier. It keeps us from leaping to conclusions, but it also risks binding us too tightly to what we already know. To suggest that the pyramids or megaliths worldwide belong to an older epoch is to demand a rewriting of history, and such rewriting requires more than whispers of myth or alignments of stars. It requires artifacts, inscriptions, continuity, things time itself may have erased. And so archaeology stands firm, its caution both admirable and frustrating. Admirable because it ensures that history remains grounded in what can be proven. frustrating because it may blind us to what cannot yet be proven, to the tantalizing possibility that myths and monuments are fragments of a truth larger than the record. Perhaps the problem is not archaeology itself, but our expectation that it can provide certainty. The past is not a fixed story but a palimpsest, layers written and erased, remembered and forgotten. Archaeology reads what remains, but what remains is fragmentary at best. To imagine that we have the whole story is to mistake a torn page for a book. And so, when faced with monuments like the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, or Yonaguni, we hover between two worlds, the world of cautious scholarship and the world of speculation. Archaeology demands evidence, myth, and stone whisper of deeper possibilities. Between them lies the silence of time, a silence that may never fully be broken. In that silence, the archaeology problem remains. How do we balance rigor with imagination? How do we honor the record without closing our minds to what the record may have lost? The pyramids endure, the myths endure, the questions endure. And perhaps in the end, the problem is not to solve archaeology, but to accept that history is larger than any one discipline, larger than stone, larger than myth. That to seek the truth of the past is to stand at the edge of mystery, looking back into a darkness that will never fully yield its secrets. For all that archaeology has uncovered the tombs, the temples, the shards of pottery and fragments of bone, the truth is that most of human history remains unseen. Vast stretches of our past are still blank, lost to erosion, flood, fire, and the quiet turning of the earth itself. What we know is only a fragment, a scattering of pages from a book whose story is almost entirely missing. Consider this: modern humans, Homo sapiens, have walked the earth for at least 300 years. Yet the sweep of what we call recorded history, the dynasties, empires, and chronicles that fill our museums and textbooks, covers scarcely the last 98% of our story lies in silence, its details carried only in myth, genetic memory, and stone. What happened in those forgotten eons? How many cultures rose and fell without leaving a trace? Even when traces do survive, they are often tantalizingly incomplete. A fragment of bone, a scattering of tools. The charcoal remains of an ancient fire, enough to prove presence, but not enough to tell a story. The deeper we dig, the thinner the record becomes. Entire landscapes that once teemed with life are gone, buried beneath deserts, oceans, and mountains that have shifted beyond recognition. The scale of what is missing is staggering. Less than 1% of human settlements have been excavated. Of the billions of lives once lived, only a tiny fraction left durable remains. Wood rots, cloth decays, metal corrodes. Even stone can weather away, ground to dust by ice, sand, and time. If our own cities were abandoned today, how much of them would survive 10 years hence? Perhaps only fragments of concrete, scattered plastics, and a few monuments of stone. If an earlier civilization existed 20 years ago, why would we expect its fragile traces to survive at all? And then there are the seas. During the Ice Age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Coastlines extended far out from where they are now. Fertile plains, river valleys, and settlements would have flourished along these ancient shores, only to be drowned when the glaciers melted and the oceans rose. Today, those landscapes are buried beneath hundreds of feet of water, out of reach of all but the most specialized archaeological exploration. Doggerland beneath the North Sea, Sunderland beneath Southeast Asia, and drowned coastal shelves across the world may hold the ruins of whole chapters of our forgotten past. The absence of evidence, then, may not be evidence of absence. It may simply be the natural result of time's erasures. Civilizations do not vanish neatly. They are swallowed by flood, ground down by ice, burned away by volcanic fire. Over thousands of years, their remnants are scattered so finely into the earth that only the faintest traces remain. And those traces, when we do find them, are so ambiguous that we hesitate to see them for what they may truly be. This is why the gaps in the record are both daunting and liberating. Daunting, because they remind us of how little we truly know. Liberating, because they open the door to possibility. They remind us that history is not a closed book, but a mystery still being written, and that our understanding of ourselves may yet change in ways we cannot imagine. Speculation fills the silence. Could there have been civilizations before ours? Not in the modern industrial sense, but cultures advanced in ways we do not measure, masters of stone, of astronomy, of oral tradition, of endurance. Could their knowledge have been passed down not through artifacts, but through myth, architecture, and story, refracted into the traditions we inherit today? Some point to sites like Göbekli Tepe as proof of such possibilities, monuments built by peoples far earlier than we once thought capable of such feats. Others look to the flood myths, the recurring tales of a world destroyed and remade, and see cultural memory of real cataclysms. Still others examine the pyramids, the Sphinx, or the megaliths of the Andes, and wonder if they are survivors of a tradition older than we know, preserved against the tide of forgetting. Archaeology demands patience and caution, but imagination invites us to consider, perhaps the silence of the record is itself the evidence. Perhaps the very absence of continuity, these sudden bursts of monumentality, these anomalies that seem too great for their context, are signs of inheritance, fragments from earlier ages re-emerging in later ones. Think of it like stars on a cloudy night. Most of the sky is hidden, but here and there, a point of light breaks through, suggesting the vastness beyond. Our record of the past is much the same. Scattered stars of evidence against a backdrop of darkness, we connect the points into constellations, into stories we call history. But the truth, the full sky of our past, is mostly concealed. It may be that we will never uncover the missing pieces. The sea may keep its drowned cities forever. The earth may continue to recycle its surface, erasing older traces. Myths may remain ambiguous, their meanings blurred beyond recovery. And yet, the gaps themselves remind us to stay humble. They remind us that our knowledge is provisional, that the stories we tell about our origins are built not on certainties, but on fragments. In this light, the gaps in the record are not only obstacles, they are invitations. They invite us to wonder, to imagine, to ask questions archaeology cannot yet answer. They remind us that history is not finished, and that the silence of the past may still yield secrets if we learn to listen differently. Perhaps, buried deep beneath the seas or locked in unexcavated earth, lies the evidence of an older chapter, tools, monuments, inscriptions that will rewrite what we think we know. Or perhaps all that remains are myths and megaliths, fragments of a story that will never fully be told. Either way, the gaps themselves are a kind of testimony. They tell us that forgetting is as much a part of history as remembering, and that to know ourselves, we must accept not only what is known, but what is unknowable. And so, as we move deeper into the mystery, we carry this awareness that the record of our past is not whole but fractured, not complete but tentative, that between the stones and the stories, between archaeology and imagination, there stretches a vast silence. And in that silence, perhaps, lies the truest measure of humanity, not only what we have built and remembered, but what we have lost, and what we still dream to rediscover. If silence marks most of our history, then catastrophe is the punctuation that breaks it. Civilizations do not fade only from neglect or erosion. Sometimes they are erased in an instant by fire, flood, or stone falling from the sky. To understand the gaps in our record, we must understand the forces of geological catastrophe, the sudden convulsions of Earth that have ended worlds before. One of the most debated of these events is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age was ending, the Earth's climate abruptly reversed. Temperatures plummeted. Glaciers advanced again. Megafauna mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths vanished in mass extinctions. Human cultures that had begun to settle and expand were thrown back into survival. For more than 1,000 years, this mini ice age gripped the planet, before giving way to the warmer Holocene epoch in which we now live. What caused this sudden reversal? Mainstream science still debates. One possibility is a disruption of ocean currents as ice sheets melted, flooding the seas with fresh water and altering global circulation. Another, more controversial, is that a comet or asteroid fragmented in Earth's atmosphere, striking glaciers in North America and elsewhere, triggering massive fires, floods, and climate chaos. This is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Supporters point to layers of sediment containing microspherules, high levels of platinum, and nanodiamonds materials that may be linked to cosmic impacts. Skeptics counter that the evidence is inconclusive, that the climate may have shifted without extraterrestrial cause. Yet the debate itself reveals how fragile the boundary is between stability and catastrophe. Imagine, for a moment, what such an event would mean for a civilization living then. Imagine communities thriving along Ice Age rivers and coasts, building, farming, perhaps even experimenting with stone. Then, suddenly, skies darken, firestorms rage, glaciers melt, seas rise, floods sweep away villages. The climate grows harsher, crops fail, animals vanish. For generations, survival becomes the only goal. Whatever knowledge they had, whatever culture they built, is fractured, reduced to stories, to memories of gods and disasters told around fires in the dark. If monuments like Göbekli Tepe arose around 9,600 BCE, just as the Younger Dryas ended, perhaps they were built not in the dawn of civilization but in its rebirth. Survivors of chaos may have gathered to build in stone what they feared would be lost again, to preserve memory, to anchor their world after one had been destroyed. In this light, Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly but a survival, an echo of something that endured the storm. Could the pyramids themselves be part of this lineage? If their alignments point to 10,500 BCE, as some claim, then they may encode not just the stars but the trauma of the Younger Dryas, the great reset of humanity. Perhaps they were conceived as timekeepers, not only of celestial cycles but of catastrophe itself, markers to warn future generations. This has happened before, and it will happen again. Catastrophes on this scale are not rare in Earth's history. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck the Yucatan, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. Supervolcanoes have darkened skies and poisoned lands. Tsunamis have swallowed coasts. Earth is not gentle. It is restless, violent, and ever-changing. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are fragile in the face of such power. To imagine that none before ours could have been erased is to underestimate the planet we live on. Myths, again, may preserve these memories. Nearly every culture carries stories of floods, fires, and falling stars. The Bible's flood, Mesopotamia's deluge, India's tale of Manu, Greek stories of Deucalion all recall worlds ended by water. Other myths speak of fire from the sky, of darkness lasting years, of gods punishing humanity with storms and plagues. To archaeology, these are stories. To geology, they sound like memories of real events, comets, volcanoes, sudden floods. Perhaps the myths and the sediments are two halves of the same truth. What is striking is not only that catastrophe can destroy, but that it can erase selectively. Wood, metal, clay tablets all vanish quickly. Even cities built of brick crumble to dust. But stone endures. This may explain why so many ancient cultures turned to megaliths, why survivors of disaster chose stone as their medium. It was not only permanence they sought, but insurance against the next catastrophe. If fire falls again, if seas rise again, let at least the stones remain. And perhaps this is why pyramids resonate with us still. Not because they are merely tombs or monuments, but because they embody survival in the face of catastrophe. They are messages across time, reminders that Earth itself is a destroyer, that civilizations rise not only against forgetting, but against annihilation. In their silence, they tell us, "This has happened before. Do not believe it cannot happen again." In this way, geological catastrophes are not only explanations for gaps in the record, they are also mirrors. They show us our own fragility, our own illusion of permanence. We live in an age of great power, with machines, satellites, and cities that span continents, yet we too are vulnerable. A single asteroid, a single supervolcano, a sudden shift in climate could undo centuries in an instant. We imagine ourselves unique, but the Earth is indifferent. It has ended worlds before, and it may end ours. And so, when we ask whether pyramids could be remnants of a civilization destroyed in the chaos of 800 years ago, the answer is not only archaeological but existential. Perhaps they are, perhaps they are not. But the question itself reminds us that humanity has always been provisional, that our triumphs may be undone not by failure alone, but by the vast, indifferent forces of the cosmos and the earth beneath our feet. To look at the pyramids in this light is to see them not only as monuments of Egypt, but as monuments of humanity itself, symbols of resilience, of memory, of survival against catastrophe. They whisper that worlds end, but life endures. Civilizations fall, but stone remembers. And in their endurance, they invite us to wonder whether we, too, will leave anything that can outlast the next great punctuation of history. History is often told as a straight line, an ascent from simplicity to complexity, from caves to cities, from ignorance to enlightenment. But the deeper we look, the more it resembles a cycle. Time and again, humanity has built, flourished, and then been forced to start over, its hard-won knowledge scattered like ashes on the wind. In this light, civilizations are not permanent peaks but waves, rising and falling against the shore of time. The great catastrophes of the past, the Younger Dryas, volcanic eruptions, floods, plagues, and wars were not only destructive, but transformative. Each time the world shifted, cultures were broken apart, scattered, or erased, leaving survivors to rebuild with what they remembered and to forget what they could no longer sustain. Civilization is not a continuous climb, but a series of resets, each one carrying fragments of the last. We see this pattern clearly in recorded history. The fall of the Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE left a dark age across the Mediterranean. Great cities collapsed, trade routes broke, and writing itself nearly disappeared. Yet a few centuries later, new cultures emerged: the Greeks, the Etruscans, the Persians, each carrying faint echoes of what had been lost, reshaped into something new. The fall of Rome centuries later repeated the cycle. Cities emptied, knowledge fractured, yet within monasteries and oral traditions, fragments were preserved to spark the Renaissance 1,000 years later. If this has happened in the span of a few thousand years, how many times might it have happened in the span of tens of thousands? How many cycles of rise and fall may lie hidden in the vast stretches of prehistory, erased by floods, fires, and shifting earth? The pyramids, in this speculative lens, could be relics of such a reset, not the products of a linear rise within dynastic Egypt alone, but the survivors of an earlier tradition knowledge carried across a cataclysm and reborn in stone. Their geometry, their astronomical alignments, their sheer permanence suggest not only ambition, but intention. a desire to create something that could survive the next fall, the next forgetting, a message not for contemporaries, but for the future. This idea resonates with the myths of flood survivors and god kings who brought knowledge after disaster. If cultures were repeatedly reset, then each generation of survivors would appear as gods to the next, carrying skills that seemed miraculous. Agriculture, stonework, astronomy, each could be preserved through cycles, fragmented but enduring. Myths, then, may not speak of singular divine gifts, but of repeated inheritances carried forward by those who remembered when all else was lost. Consider the knowledge of the stars, precession, solstices, equinoxes. The careful tracking of the heavens requires generations of observation. If the pyramids encode such knowledge, then it may be evidence not of sudden discovery, but of continuity preserved through resets. Imagine survivors of an earlier culture watching the skies through chaos, teaching their children to remember, so that when stability returned, they could inscribe the cycle into stone. Even within our own history, we see how fragile knowledge can be. The Library of Alexandria, with its scrolls of science, philosophy, and history, was destroyed in fire, its treasures lost forever. Mayan codices were burned by conquistadors, erasing centuries of astronomical and cultural memory. What we call history is riddled with such erasures, gaps where memory was reset by violence or disaster. If this can happen in the span of a few years, how much more can be lost over millennia? Speculation, then, is not wild fantasy but an acknowledgement of this fragility. If cultures as advanced as Egypt and Rome could fall, their knowledge scattered, why not others before them? Why not civilizations older than we know, whose traces have been erased by rising seas or shifting earth? Perhaps the pyramids are not anomalies at all, but survivors, the stone memory of a reset world. To imagine civilization as cyclical is to see humanity differently. We are not the pinnacle of a single ascent, but participants in a rhythm larger than ourselves. Rise, flourish, fall, remember, rebuild. Each cycle carries fragments of the last, but each also loses much, leaving future generations to wonder what was forgotten. The pyramids, then, may be less mysteries of construction than testimonies of resilience. They stand because their builders understood the fragility of memory and sought to anchor it in stone. There is something profoundly humbling in this view. We, too, live in a fragile world, vulnerable to catastrophe, to collapse, to the sudden resets of history. We imagine our knowledge safe in books, servers, and satellites. But these are fragile things, vulnerable to fire, flood, and time. In the long view, what we call permanence is only illusion. Unless we, too, choose to anchor our memory in forms that endure, we may one day be reduced to whispers, our knowledge remembered only in fragments by those who come after. And so the pyramids invite us not only to wonder about the past, but to reflect on the future. If they are relics of a reset world, then they are also warnings. Civilizations can fall, knowledge can be lost, and only what we choose to preserve deliberately will endure. They are perhaps not only tombs, not only temples, but messages across cycles of time. Remember, build to last. Know that worlds can end, but knowledge must endure. To ask whether the pyramids are older than we think is not simply to shift a date on a timeline. It is to shake the very foundations of our history. If the pyramids predate the dynasties of Egypt, if they belong not to Khufu and his heirs, but to an epoch lost in the mists of deep time, then everything we know about civilization must be reconsidered. History as we tell it today is a story of progress. Hunter-gatherers gave way to farmers, farmers to villages, villages to cities, cities to states, and states to empires. The pyramids, in this account, are the triumph of that long ascent, a culmination of thousands of years of experimentation in mud, brick, and stone. finally perfected under the pharaohs of the fourth dynasty. But if the pyramids are older, if they were raised not 4,000 years ago but 10 or even 12, then that neat ascent is broken. Civilization would no longer be a straight line, but a cycle. Humanity would no longer be the first advanced builders, but heirs to a legacy we scarcely remember. The implications ripple outward. Our timeline of innovation: agriculture around 10,000 BCE, cities around 5,000 BCE. Monumental architecture only later would have to be rewritten. If monuments like the pyramids or the Sphinx belong to the Ice Age world, then humanity was building at a scale of permanence long before the supposed dawn of civilization. The agricultural revolution would no longer mark the beginning, but a rebirth after catastrophe. Our history would not begin in Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley, but stretch back into an age we have forgotten. For archaeology, this would be both a crisis and an awakening. A crisis, because the framework of evidence, pottery sequences, stratigraphy, dynastic records, would no longer be sufficient to explain the anomalies. But an awakening, because it would open the door to a far deeper story of humanity, one in which memory is longer, resilience greater, and the human capacity for ingenuity stretches into epochs beyond our current imagination. It would also mean we are not alone in our uniqueness. We often comfort ourselves with the idea that we are the first and only advanced civilization on Earth, that our skyscrapers and satellites mark us as unprecedented. But if the pyramids are older, if they were built by hands that carried knowledge through catastrophe, then we are not unique, we are one of many. Civilizations may rise, fall, and rise again, each time believing themselves the first, each time leaving behind fragments for the next. This thought is humbling. It places us not at the pinnacle of progress, but within a cycle of forgetting and remembering. It suggests that the line between myth and history is thinner than we think, that the gods of memory may have been survivors of earlier worlds, and that their monuments were not only symbols of power but messages across time. If the pyramids are older, then they are not only tombs but testimonies. They bear witness to a chapter of human history we cannot yet read, to a time when people, our ancestors, stood beneath the same stars and dreamed of permanence against the tide of forgetting. They tell us that the impulse to build, to align with the heavens, to create meaning in stone, is not unique to any one age but fundamental to what it means to be human. And what of our place, if this is true? If we are not the first advanced builders, then we inherit more than just the earth. We inherit its memory, its forgotten civilizations, its cycles of rise and fall. The pyramids become not simply artifacts of Egypt, but part of a much larger story, a story of resilience, survival, and the human desire to leave something that endures when all else is lost. The implications reach even further. If humanity has built before, fallen, and built again, then perhaps this is the rhythm of intelligence itself. Perhaps civilizations are not permanent fixtures but waves, inevitable in their rise, inevitable in their fall. If so, then our skyscrapers and satellites are not proof of uniqueness, but part of a recurring pattern, one that has played out before and may play out again after we are gone. To imagine the pyramids as older is to imagine a humanity far older, far stranger, and far more enduring than we believe. It is to see our species not as a single story, but as many stories, layered and forgotten, erased and reborn. It is to accept that much of what we call history may be only the surface of a far deeper ocean, one whose depths are still hidden beneath the sands, the seas, and the silence of time. Perhaps that is why the pyramids move us so deeply. They whisper of something greater, something older, something enduring. They remind us that we are not the first to dream, not the first to build, not the first to seek permanence against the flood of time. And if they are indeed older, then they are also reminders that we, too, will one day be forgotten, that our skyscrapers will crumble, our cities will vanish, and only what we choose to anchor in permanence will remain. If the pyramids are older, then they are not mysteries to be solved, but mirrors. They show us our fragility, our resilience, our cycles of forgetting and remembering. They show us that history is larger than we imagine, and that we are only one chapter in a story that began long before us and may continue long after we are gone. For all the speculation, for all the whispers of lost civilizations and forgotten ages, we must also pause and look squarely at what mainstream archaeology tells us. Even within its accepted framework, the pyramids are not diminished. They remain astonishing monuments of stone that defy time, built by a Bronze Age society with tools of copper, ropes of fiber, and the sheer determination of tens of thousands of people. To accept the orthodox timeline is not to lessen the wonder, but to see it through a different lens, not as echoes of a vanished age, but as the pinnacle of Egypt's own genius. Dynastic Egypt, after all, was a world unto itself, a civilization of breathtaking sophistication. By the time Khufu ordered the Great Pyramid raised, the Nile Valley had already seen centuries of experimentation in stone. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, designed by the polymath Imhotep, marked the first great leap, a stacked mastaba rising into the sky, a vision of eternity cast in limestone. From there, pyramids evolved, bent, collapsed, refined until the architects of the Fourth Dynasty achieved perfection at Giza. To stand before the Great Pyramid even today is to feel the weight of human will made manifest. More than 2 million blocks, some weighing as much as 70 tons, stacked with such precision that the base deviates from a perfect square by mere inches. Its sides aligned almost perfectly to true north, a feat of astronomical accuracy achieved without modern instruments. Its height, once gleaming with white Tura limestone casing stones, rose nearly 150 meters into the sky, the tallest structure on Earth for over 3,000 years. To imagine this as the work of Bronze Age Egypt is not to make it smaller, but in some ways to make it greater, for it means that with simple tools and coordinated effort, human beings achieved something we struggle to replicate even today. No lost technologies, no forgotten machines, only mathematics, organization, and the determination to touch eternity. And it was not only the pyramids. Dynastic Egypt blossomed in art, architecture, and science. Hieroglyphs flowed across stone in sacred texts and poetic hymns. Temples rose with columns carved like papyrus stalks, their ceilings painted with stars. Medicine, mathematics, and astronomy flourished, not as whispers of an earlier age but as products of their own genius. To walk through the ruins of Karnak or Luxor, to gaze upon the golden mask of Tutankhamun or the carved reliefs of Seti's temple at Abydos, is to witness a culture that reached heights of imagination and skill rivaling any in history. Mainstream archaeology sees the pyramids not as anomalies, but as the culmination of this cultural peak. They are the crown jewels of a society that revered order, Ma'at, eternity, and the divine role of the pharaoh. In this view, the pyramids are tombs, not because their builders lacked imagination, but because their imagination sought permanence. To encase a king in stone, to align his resting place with the stars, was to ensure that he, and Egypt itself, would endure forever. If this is the truth, then the wonder is not lessened, it is magnified, for it means that human beings, our ancestors, with no machines, no engines, no steel, looked at the desert and decided to reshape it into monuments that would last for millennia. It means that the same species that once chipped flint and hunted with spears could, in time, raise mountains of stone that still humble us today. Even within the orthodox framework, mysteries remain. How precisely were the blocks cut, transported, and placed? How were the internal chambers aligned with such accuracy? How did a society with no iron tools or wheels achieve such feats? Archaeologists offer answers: ramp systems, copper chisels, rope sledges, ingenious labor organization. But the scale remains staggering. To accept these explanations is not to explain away the mystery, but to marvel at human ingenuity. And there is another lesson here. If the pyramids belong firmly to dynastic Egypt, then they remind us of the power of culture itself. Civilizations do not need lost technologies or forgotten ancestors to achieve greatness. They need imagination, organization, and belief. Egypt had all three in abundance. Its monuments were not accidents, but deliberate expressions of a worldview that united earth and sky, life and death, human and divine. To see the pyramids in this light is to see them not as anomalies, but as mirrors of a culture that understood permanence in ways we are still learning to grasp. Why, then, does the orthodox story sometimes feel less compelling than the speculative one? Perhaps because we hunger for mystery, for the possibility that there is more to the past than we know. But perhaps also because we underestimate the wonder of what we do know. To imagine that ordinary human beings, with ordinary tools, could create something as extraordinary as the pyramids is to glimpse the true miracle of civilization, that from dust and stone, from sweat and vision, we can shape eternity. If the mainstream is right, then the pyramids are not diminished, they are exalted. They remind us that genius is not confined to lost ages or forgotten worlds, but is within us still. They remind us that even without machines, even without modern science, human beings are capable of marvels that transcend time. And so, whether the pyramids are older than we think, or exactly as mainstream archaeology tells us, they remain extraordinary. They remain proof of what humanity can achieve, whether once or many times, whether in cycles or in singular ascent. They remind us that the line between myth and history, speculation and certainty, is less important than the awe that both inspire. If the mainstream is right, then the pyramids stand not as relics of a forgotten civilization, but as triumphs of Egypt itself, testimonies to human imagination, resilience, and the eternal drive to leave something that endures. And in that light, they are no less mysterious, no less magnificent, no less worthy of wonder. When we gaze upon the pyramids, whether through the lens of archaeology or speculation, we are not only looking at stone, we are also looking inward into the landscape of our own minds. For the questions we ask of the pyramids: who built you, when, and why, are also questions about ourselves. What do we seek in imagining older origins, golden ages, or lost worlds? Why do we hunger for stories that place us within cycles of greatness and decline? Philosophers and mythologists have long noted this tendency, humanity's yearning for deeper beginnings, for a time when things were greater, purer, closer to the divine. Hesiod, the ancient Greek poet, spoke of the ages of man from the golden age of peace and abundance, through the silver and bronze ages of decline, to the present Iron Age, marked by toil and strife. In India, the Hindu concept of yugas envisions cosmic cycles in which humanity descends from the Satya Yuga, an age of truth and virtue, through successive declines until the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. In nearly every culture, myths of origin are not stories of progress but of loss, memories of a time when the world was better, richer, closer to perfection. Why this insistence on decline? Perhaps it reflects the human experience of memory itself. Childhood, in retrospect, often seems a golden age, a time of wonder and simplicity, later overshadowed by the complexity and struggle of adulthood. Cultures, too, remember their own childhoods as golden, projecting into the past a time when life was more harmonious, more abundant, more whole. In this sense, myths of golden ages may not only be about history, but about psychology, the universal desire to believe that what we have lost was better than what we have. The pyramids, then, become symbols of this longing, To imagine them older than Egypt is to imagine a time when humanity was closer to its own golden age, an age of forgotten knowledge, of godlike teachers, of civilizations that rose before the flood. To accept the mainstream view, meanwhile, is to marvel at what human beings can accomplish even without lost wisdom, affirming the possibility of greatness in any age. In both cases, the pyramids are mirrors of our need to believe that there is more to us than the present moment, that we belong to a story larger than ourselves. There is also comfort in the idea of lost greatness. If we believe that an earlier civilization achieved wonders and then fell, it suggests that our own age is not alone in its fragility. It reframes decline not as failure, but as part of a natural rhythm, a cycle of rise and fall that all civilizations must endure. In this way, imagining past greatness offers a kind of psychological shield. Even if we fall, we are not unique. We are part of a pattern older than memory itself. At the same time, this yearning can also be dangerous. The myth of decline can foster nostalgia so powerful that it blinds us to the present, leading us to dismiss our own achievements as lesser, or to imagine salvation only in recovering what was lost. Civilizations that idolize golden ages often turn away from the challenges of their own time, seeking in the past what can only be built anew. The pyramids, when seen this way, become not only symbols of wonder, but also warnings, reminders that greatness lies not only behind us, but before us, if we dare to create it. Still, the hunger for deeper origins persists. It surfaces in philosophy, in literature, in religion, in the way we tell stories about ourselves. Modern science, too, has its own version of golden ages, not in myth, but in the search for first causes. Cosmology seeks the beginning of the universe, biology the origins of life, archaeology the first city, the first tool, the first spark of fire. Beneath all these pursuits lies the same yearning, to find the point of origin, the moment when order began from chaos, when meaning began from silence. Perhaps this is why the pyramids fascinate us so deeply. They stand as physical embodiments of origin stories, massive, enduring, yet silent, inviting us to project our own meanings upon them. To some, they are tombs, expressions of dynastic power. To others, they are relics of lost civilizations. To all, they are symbols of permanence, of memory, of humanity's refusal to be erased. In the end, the philosophical lens reveals less about the pyramids than it does about ourselves. Whether we imagine them as relics of a golden age or triumphs of human ingenuity, what we are truly seeking is reassurance that we are part of something larger, that our lives are not fleeting sparks in the void, that meaning endures. The pyramids answer that yearning not with words, but with silence, the silence of stone that has endured for millennia and will endure for millennia more. And perhaps that silence is the true lesson. Civilizations may rise and fall, myths may speak of decline or golden ages, but the deeper truth lies in what endures, not in the certainty of origins, but in the resilience of meaning. The pyramids remind us that while history may be written in fragments, the human impulse to seek permanence, to create symbols that transcend time, is unbroken. The pyramid is not confined to Egypt. Across continents and cultures, across thousands of years, human beings have returned again and again to this same shape. A broad base narrowing to a single point, a mountain built by human hands. From the desert sands of Giza to the jungles of Mesoamerica, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the step pyramids of Southeast Asia, the form repeats as if it were not only an architectural solution, but an archetype embedded in the human mind. Why the pyramid? On one level, the answer is practical. A pyramid is stable. Its weight rests evenly. Its sloping sides resist collapse. Its form endures against wind and time. If you wish to build tall with stone, without steel or mortar, the pyramid is the shape that survives. But this explanation, though true, feels incomplete. For pyramids are not only stable, they are symbolic. They rise like mountains, connecting earth and sky. They embody ascent, convergence, the journey from multiplicity to unity. Their form is at once natural and transcendent, a human echo of cosmic order. In Egypt, the pyramid was the pharaoh's ladder to the heavens, a symbolic mountain upon which his soul could ascend to join the gods among the stars. In Mesoamerica, pyramids rose as temples, their summits crowned with shrines where rituals bridged the human and the divine. The Maya aligned them to solstices and equinoxes. The Aztecs dedicated them to gods of sun and war. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose as stairways to heaven, linking city and cosmos. Even in Southeast Asia, stepped pyramids and temple mountains echoed the sacred Mount Meru, the axis of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Different cultures, different myths, different gods, yet the same shape. Is this mere coincidence? A convergence born of practicality and imagination? Or is it something deeper, a memory carried across cultures, a geometry of meaning that endures even when histories are forgotten? Some have speculated that the pyramid is more than architecture, that it is a symbol embedded in the psyche, perhaps even in the structure of the cosmos itself. Its triangular form appears in nature, in mountains, in crystals, in the rays of the sun as they descend to earth. Its geometry reflects stability, ascent, convergence. Perhaps then, the pyramid is less an invention than a discovery, a recognition of a form that already exists in the order of the world. To imagine this is to see pyramids not only as monuments, but as archetypes, expressions of a timeless memory that transcends culture. Just as myths of floods and golden ages recur across the world, so too does the pyramid. Either, both may be fragments of something deeper, something older than any single civilization. Perhaps survivors of past cycles carried the form with them, building in stone what they remembered of sacred mountains or lost temples. Or perhaps the pyramid emerges naturally wherever humans seek permanence, a universal answer to the universal question: how do we connect the earth to the sky? Psychology offers another lens. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, patterns of thought and symbols shared across humanity, arising from the collective unconscious. The pyramid, in this sense, may be one such archetype, a shape that speaks to all people, regardless of culture, because it reflects something fundamental in the human imagination. To build a pyramid is to enact ascent, to embody order, to reach toward transcendence. Whether in Egypt, Mexico, or Mesopotamia, the impulse may arise not from diffusion alone, but from the shared architecture of the human mind. And yet, the speculative mind wonders, could the pyramid be more than archetype? Could it be memory? If civilizations rose before, as some believe, perhaps the pyramid was their symbol too, carried forward through cycles of forgetting. If so, then each pyramid we see today is not an isolated invention, but a re-emergence, a fragment of a timeless tradition, repeating itself across ages. The form may endure not only because it is practical, but because it is remembered, even if unconsciously. Even in modern times, the pyramid haunts our imagination. It appears in art, in literature, in the icons of secret societies, even in the design of monuments and skyscrapers. Its geometry suggests permanence, power, and mystery. We still imbue it with meaning, long after the cultures that first raised it have fallen silent. Perhaps this is the true power of the pyramid, that it transcends history. Whether as tomb, temple, or symbol, it carries meanings that endure across time. It is a mountain of memory, a geometry of aspiration, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. It reminds us that while civilizations may pass, certain forms of meaning endure, carried not only in stone, but in the patterns of the human soul. The pyramid, then, is more than an ancient monument. It is a timeless symbol, a universal archetype, a memory that may stretch back further than we know. To gaze upon it is to see not only Egypt or Mesoamerica, but humanity itself, our longing for permanence, our yearning for the divine, our impulse to shape the world in forms that reflect both earth and sky. And perhaps this is why pyramids still move us so deeply. They are not only relics of the past, but symbols of something larger, something that endures beyond any one culture, any one age. They remind us that while history may be written and rewritten, while civilizations rise and fall, there are truths that remain. The mountain, the sky, the ascent of the human spirit. Part 12a. The future of the pyramids. If the pyramids have endured for more than 4,000 years, their stones holding fast through dynasties, invasions, earthquakes, and shifting sands, how much longer will they last? How far into the future will their silence stretch? To ask this is to turn the lens of deep time forward, imagining not only what the pyramids tell us of the past, but what they might still say to the distant future. Geologists remind us that the pyramids, like all things, are not eternal. Wind and sand slowly grind their surfaces. Earthquakes can topple their stones. Floods and climate shifts may alter the very land on which they stand. Yet, even so, estimates suggest that the pyramids could endure for tens of thousands of years, perhaps longer. Their mass, their stability, their sheer geometric simplicity makes them resistant to the forces that erase so much else. Where cities crumble, monuments fall, and libraries burn, the pyramids remain. To imagine this is to recognize that the pyramids may outlast not only our civilizations, but perhaps even our species. Long after our skyscrapers have fallen, long after our satellites have decayed in orbit, long after our languages have been forgotten, the pyramids may still rise from the desert, mute witnesses to a world no longer ours. They may be one of the last traces of humanity upon the earth. Consider how fragile most of our creations are. Metal rusts, glass shatters, plastic may linger, but in fragments, scattered across seas and soils. Digital memory, stored in servers and satellites, will vanish with the collapse of power grids and the erosion of machines. Our literature, our art, our music, unless etched into something more permanent, will fade to nothing. In the vast sweep of geological time, even the greatest of our cities will be dust. And yet, the pyramids may still endure. Their weight anchors them against the desert winds. Their sloping sides deflect erosion. Their stones, massive and interlocked, resist the collapse that might destroy towers and walls. If even a fraction of them survives, they may still stand as mountains of memory long after all else is gone. This endurance has inspired speculation that the pyramids may not only be monuments of the past, but time capsules for the future. If they were designed with alignments to stars and solstices, if they encode geometry and proportion, perhaps they were meant to speak not only to their contemporaries, but to anyone who might one day rediscover them. Their form, simple yet profound, requires no translation. It declares, "Here, human beings once lived. Here, they dreamed of eternity." In this sense, the pyramids join a small company of structures that may outlast us. Mount Rushmore, carved into granite, may endure for millions of years. The Great Wall of China, though vast, will crumble more quickly. Nuclear waste repositories, designed to last 10,000 years, may vanish long before the pyramids. Even our satellites, orbiting the Earth, will one day fall and burn in the atmosphere. But the pyramids, rooted in the desert, will remain silent, enigmatic, indestructible by comparison. What will they mean to those who come after? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps they will be seen as mere curiosities, relics of a forgotten species. Or perhaps they will inspire awe, just as they inspire us awe at the ambition of beings who, long ago, sought to build something that could defy time itself. If humanity falls and another species rises, or if visitors from other worlds one day arrive, the pyramids may be our only voice. They may speak for us when all else is gone. There is something profoundly humbling in this thought. We pride ourselves on progress, on technology, on the fleeting brilliance of our age. But in the long view, our most enduring legacy may not be our machines or our digital networks, but our stones. Not the skyscraper, but the pyramid. Not the server, but the monument. What we leave to deep time is not what we think defines us, but what endures in silence after we are gone. Perhaps this too was understood by the builders. Whether dynastic Egyptians or heirs to a deeper tradition, perhaps they knew that all else would vanish, that only stone would remain. And so they built mountains of stone not only to honor their kings, but to ensure that their presence upon the earth could not be erased. Perhaps they built not only for themselves, but for us, for those who would come later, to look upon their works and remember that humanity had dreamed of eternity. And so, when we imagine the future of the pyramids, we imagine more than geology. We imagine meaning. For even if their stones are eventually worn down, even if their shapes are buried by shifting sands, the fact of their endurance will continue to inspire. As long as they stand, they remind us of the possibility of permanence. And even when they are gone, their memory will linger, carried in story and imagination, symbols of what it means to strive against the tide of forgetting. The pyramids are thus not only relics of the past, but guardians of the future. They anchor us in deep time, reminding us that civilizations rise and fall, but that certain creations can outlast them. They tell us that permanence is possible, that memory can be etched into the earth itself, that meaning can endure beyond the fall of worlds. And perhaps that is their truest purpose, not only to serve as tombs or temples or alignments to the stars, but to remind us that humanity can choose what it leaves behind. We can build for the moment, or we can build for eternity. The pyramids whisper that eternity is possible, if only we have the will to shape it. If the pyramids stand as echoes of a forgotten age, then what of our own monuments? What of the skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, the statues that rise above harbors, the dams that hold back rivers, the networks of satellites that shimmer like constellations in orbit? How will they appear to the distant future, if they appear at all? The truth is sobering. Most of our works, though vast and impressive to us, will not endure. Concrete crumbles, steel corrodes, glass fractures. Digital memory is the most fragile of all. Millions of servers humming with information, yet utterly dependent on power grids and infrastructure that will not last beyond centuries at most. 1,000 years after our fall, our cities will be forests of stone and rust. 10,000 years later, little will remain but fragments, buried under soil and sediment. And yet, some things may endure. Mount Rushmore, carved into granite, may still bear the faint faces of presidents long after their names are forgotten. Hoover Dam, massive and deeply anchored, could survive as a ruin whose original function is a mystery. The Statue of Liberty, stripped of copper and iron, might leave its stone base as a silent marker. Our great bridges may collapse, but their foundations could remain, strange stumps rising from rivers. Even our nuclear waste repositories, designed to last 10,000 years, may outlast their warning signs, leaving future beings to wonder at their strange subterranean structures. But above all, it is our monuments of stone that will most likely persist. Like the pyramids, they are massive, simple, and resistant to time. If the pyramids are whispers from the past to us, then perhaps our own monuments will be whispers from us to the future. Imagine, then, a future species, whether human or not, walking upon the earth 10,000 years hence. Our skyscrapers are gone, our languages forgotten, our histories erased. And yet, They stumble upon the ruins of a pyramid, or a dam, or a colossal statue half buried in sand. To them, it will be a riddle. Who built this? When? Why? They will speculate, as we speculate, weaving myths around what they cannot explain. Perhaps they will imagine us as giants, capable of shaping stone with ease. Perhaps they will imagine gods descending to earth to teach the art of building. Perhaps they will place our works in epochs far older than they are, misled by the absence of context, just as some today imagine the pyramids to be older than Egypt. Our monuments, stripped of history, may become the myths of another age. In this sense, the cycle of forgetting and rediscovery is not confined to the past, it extends into the future. Just as we look upon the pyramids and wonder if they are relics of a forgotten civilization, so too may our descendants look upon our ruins and wonder the same. What if New York was not a city, but a temple complex? What if Hoover Dam was not infrastructure, but a monument to a god of water? What if our satellites, their orbits decayed, fell as fire from the sky, and became the myths of a future generation who knew nothing of space travel? The irony is that even as we speculate about forgotten civilizations, we may be creating the conditions for others to speculate about us. The future may look upon us as we look upon Egypt, with awe, with confusion, with stories that blend fact and myth. Our monuments may be misinterpreted, their functions guessed at, their meanings recast into new myths. And in that misinterpretation, we will live again not as we were, but as symbols, as legends, as the echoes of a civilization half remembered. This thought is both humbling and haunting. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that all civilizations are subject to the same forgetting. But it also reminds us that meaning endures not in accuracy, but in resonance. The pyramids have been called tombs, observatories, repositories of lost knowledge. Perhaps they were all of these, perhaps none. What matters is that they still inspire wonder, that they still connect us to something larger than ourselves. Our own monuments, too, may one day inspire such wonder, even if their true purpose is forgotten. And perhaps this is the deeper truth of monuments. They are not built only for their own age, nor only for those who come after with perfect knowledge. They are built to endure, to carry meaning across the silence of time, to become part of the great cycle of forgetting and rediscovery. Whether we intend it or not, our monuments are messages not of facts, but of presence. They say, we were here, we dreamed, we built, we sought eternity. One day, perhaps, our monuments will stand alongside the pyramids in the imagination of a future world. They will be seen not as relics of a single time, but as part of a larger rhythm, a universal human impulse to create meaning in stone. Future beings may argue over their age, their purpose, their builders, just as we argue now about Egypt. And in their arguments, in their myths, we will live again, not as history, but as memory. So the question is not whether our monuments will be remembered accurately. They will not. The sands and the seas will strip away their context, leaving only stone. The question is whether they will endure at all, and whether in enduring, they will carry the same resonance as the pyramids do now. And if they do, then we will have achieved what the builders of the pyramids achieved. Not immortality, but continuity. Not permanence, but presence. A whisper across millennia saying only this, that we once lived, that we once dreamed, that we once built something we hoped would outlast us. In this way, the cycle continues. Just as we look backward and imagine forgotten civilizations, so too will the future look backward and imagine us. Our monuments will become their mysteries, our works will become their myths, and in that eternal cycle of forgetting and rediscovery, humanity itself becomes what it has always sought to be, a story that does not end but echoes. The pyramids endure, built by hands we name or hands we have forgotten, raised in the age of pharaohs or in an epoch deeper still, they remain unmoved by the rise and fall of empires, whether they were crafted by human masons, taught by gods, or inherited from ancestors unknown. Their meaning lies not only in their origin but in their endurance. For across millennia, they have become something greater than tombs, greater than monuments. They have become memory itself, carved in stone. It is this endurance that gives them their aura of eternity. Dynasties have come and gone, languages have shifted, religions have risen and faded. Yet the pyramids remain, their sloping sides pointing toward the sky, their shadows stretching across the desert as they have for thousands of years. They are not only relics of a past age, but companions of the present, symbols that bridge the living and the dead, the remembered and the forgotten. To stand before them is to feel time collapse. The desert wind carries grains of sand that once touched the stones in the days of Khufu, or perhaps in the days of forgotten builders who came long before. The stars that crown their peaks are the same stars that guided shepherds, priests, and astronomers across ages. The silence that surrounds them is the same silence that has endured since the first stone was set. In their presence, we are reminded that memory is not only in words or stories, but in endurance itself. The pyramids, then, are not only historical artifacts, they are symbols of rebirth. For though the pharaohs sought eternity in their chambers, the pyramids grant eternity not to kings, but to the human spirit. They remind us that civilizations may fall, but meaning can be carried forward in stone, in form, in silence. Each generation rediscovers them anew, reinterprets them, reimagines them. In this way, they are reborn again and again, not in stone but in imagination. Their silence is what makes them timeless. They do not speak, yet they invite questions. They do not explain, yet they provoke wonder. They do not declare their purpose, yet they remain potent symbols of permanence, resilience, and transcendence. In this silence lies their power, for a structure that explains itself is confined to its time, but a structure that invites mystery belongs to every age. The pyramids are thus more than monuments to the dead, they are mirrors of the living. Each culture, each age, each person who looks upon them finds their own reflection. To some, they are proof of divine intervention. To others, they are evidence of forgotten civilizations. To mainstream archaeology, they are triumphs of Egypt's old kingdom. To the dreamer, they are messages across time. In every case, they serve as memory symbols of humanity's eternal desire to be remembered, to transcend the fleeting nature of life. There is a reason they are often associated with eternity. Their shape itself suggests it. A wide base anchoring the earth, a narrowing ascent pointing toward the heavens, converging at a single point, symbolizing the journey from multiplicity to unity, from time to eternity, from life to the beyond. In this geometry lies not only architectural stability, but spiritual resonance. They are mountains carved by human will, echoing the eternal mountains of myth and nature. And because they endure, they invite us to consider our own place in time. We live in an age of impermanence, of rapid change, of fragile creations. Our buildings rise and fall in decades, our technologies become obsolete in years, our digital records vanish in the silence of power lost. Against this impermanence, the pyramids stand as rebuke and reminder. It is possible to create something that endures. It is possible to inscribe memory, not in fragile words or fleeting images, but in stone that resists the passage of ages. In this way, the pyramids are not only memories of the past, but lessons for the future. They remind us that what endures is not always what we intend, that meaning can be carried forward in unexpected ways. The builders may have sought to preserve the names of kings, but today, few remember those kings beyond their connection to the stones. What survives is not the individual, but the symbol, the enduring form, the timeless memory etched in silence. And so, whether they were built by human ingenuity, divine guidance, or the remnants of a forgotten civilization, the pyramids endure as timeless memory. They are not only markers of an ancient age, but living participants in the great cycle of remembering and forgetting. Their silence invites us to fill it with meaning. Their endurance reminds us that permanence is possible, and their mystery ensures that they will never belong wholly to the past. They are mountains of memory, timeless in their form, eternal in their resonance. And in their presence we are reminded of what we most fear and most desire, that though we are fleeting, something of us may endure. That though civilizations fall, memory can be carried forward. That though time erases all things, silence itself can speak across millennia. The pyramids endure, and in their endurance, they remind us that eternity is not the absence of time, but the presence of meaning carried forward through it. They are, in the deepest sense, timeless memory symbols of what it means to be human, to dream, to build, to seek permanence against the flood of forgetting. And so we arrive at the final question, the one the pyramids themselves seem to whisper into the desert night. Are they tombs, temples, or timekeepers? Or are they something larger still? Monuments not merely to kings or gods, but to civilization itself. Symbols designed to endure not just dynasties, but the very cycles of rise and fall that govern humanity. To see them this way is to see them not only as relics of Egypt, but as bridges across lost ages. They link the remembered with the forgotten, the present with the deep past, the living with the possibility of civilizations erased. Each stone becomes a syllable in a language of endurance, speaking not in words but in permanence. If all else vanishes, if floods consume cities, if fire devours libraries, if the earth itself shudders and resets, the pyramids remain. Perhaps that was their truest purpose, to survive catastrophe, to embody in stone the refusal of memory to be erased, to carry across cycles of destruction a message that says, simply, we were here, and we dreamed of eternity. In this light, the pyramids are not only monuments to Egypt, but monuments to civilization itself, the distilled essence of what it means to build, to endure, to remember. Imagine then a dreamlike vision. The earth turns through epochs, through cycles of ice and fire. The Sahara shifts, deserts bloom, seas rise, continents drift. Civilizations come and go, some remembered, most forgotten. Yet through it all, the pyramids endure, buried in sand, revealed again, covered in ice, freed once more. They wait, silent, for rediscovery. Picture them beneath a glacial sheet, their peaks piercing through the ice like mountains of memory. Picture them submerged beneath a risen sea, their outlines distorted but still intact, coral and fish swimming among their stones. Picture them buried in drifting dunes, forgotten for millennia, until some future traveler uncovers their angles and wonders, as we do now. Who built them? When and why? In each vision, the pyramids serve the same role, as anchors of continuity, as bridges across catastrophe, as reminders that humanity has always sought to transcend its own fragility. They do not promise immortality, but they offer presence. They do not halt the flood of forgetting, but they carve channels through which memory may still flow. And perhaps this is why they touch us so deeply. For in the pyramids we see not only stone, but ourselves, the part of us that longs to endure, to carry forward meaning when all else is lost. They are our reflection in deep time, a mirror of our own desire to be remembered, to matter, to leave something that says, we were here. As the desert night stretches on, one can imagine the pyramids as more than monuments. They are dreams given form, dreams that survive the dreamers. They are questions given shape, questions that outlive the answers. They are silence carved into permanence, whispering across millennia not only of Egypt, but of us all. And so the dreamlike vision lingers. Pyramids beneath ice and flood, pyramids waiting in silence for rediscovery, pyramids standing at the edge of memory and eternity. Whether built by kings, by forgotten ancestors, or by survivors of worlds erased, they endure as monuments to the human spirit, the spirit that dreams, that builds, that refuses to be erased. Perhaps in the far future, long after our cities are gone, long after our names are forgotten, the pyramids will still stand, waiting beneath sand, ice, or sea. And when they are rediscovered, their silence will speak again, as it speaks now, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, but meaning endures. That time erases all things, but stone remembers. That even in the face of catastrophe, it is possible to build something that carries memory across ages. The pyramids, then, are not only the past, they are also the future. They are not only monuments of stone, but monuments of imagination. They are not only relics of Egypt, but bridges across lost ages, symbols of what it means to be human, to seek eternity in the face of impermanence, to carve meaning into the silence of time. And so we end where we began, with the pyramids, standing vast and silent beneath the desert sky. Their stones cool beneath the stars, their shadows stretching into the night. They endure, as they always have, as they always will. Guardians of memory, bridges across time, monuments to what was, what is, and what may yet come. Whether raised by the hands of Old Kingdom masons or shaped by ancestors from an age far older, the pyramids endure as guardians of mystery. Their presence refuses final explanation. They are at once practical and impossible, grounded in stone yet pointing toward eternity. In their silence they confront us with a question that is not only historical, but existential. Are these monuments simply the triumphs of a single civilization, or are they messages left from a forgotten world, reminders that we are not the first to dream of permanence? The question lingers because it cannot be answered, and perhaps that is the point. The pyramids do not seek to resolve our doubts, they invite them. They draw us into wonder, into humility, into recognition that human history may be both deeper and more fragile than we imagine. So let the final vision be this: the pyramids beneath another age of ice, their forms half buried, their peaks breaking through the frozen silence of a changed earth. They wait, as they always have, not only for survival, but for rediscovery. And when the ice melts and the sands shift, they will rise again into the light, whispering to whoever finds them that memory endures, that civilization is never the first nor the last, and that across the endless turning of ages, stone still remembers.